This is HighIntensityBusiness.com with Lawrence Neal, helping you achieve your health and fitness goals. Become a great personal trainer and build your high-intensity strength training business.
Lawrence Neal here from High Intensity Business. Hope you're well. Very, very quick introduction from me, as quick as I can make it. This is the Rec Focus episode. And obviously the guys at Rec wanted to put this on due to the conference being postponed to later this year. I was so blown away by the presentation. I enjoyed it so much. I found it so useful that I asked if I could strip out the audio and publish it on the podcast for you guys. And they were all too happy to do so. So here we are. Starts off with an amazing presentation from Luke on mindset in terms of how do you adopt a more stoic mindset? How do you accept what you can't control and instead focus on what you can control during this crisis to make you just a more productive and happier and well-balanced person during what is a challenging time. We then go on to Dr. James Fisher, who talks about stress affecting strength training and vice versa. We then move on to his colleague at Solon, Emma Mosley, who talks about, Dr. Emma Mosley, who talks about slow-paced breathing for reducing stress. We then go on to Adam Zickerman over at Inform Fitness and Bill Simone, who talk about their experiences with virtual training, with training people from their homes. They talk about best practice as it relates to training from home with minimal equipment, some of their thoughts and experiences and insights. Really interesting stuff. And then there's a Q&A with both of those individuals, and you get to hear from many of the experts and HIIT studio owners chiming in with their questions for Adam and Bill during the Q&A as well. And then we end with an awesome presentation motivational speech, I should say, from Luke, in terms of the mindset you need to adopt, how you can recover from this, what you can do right now to generate revenue, put yourself in a strong position. So some real kind of practical tactics, strategies that you can implement now and when you start to reopen, and then when things are in full flow, to really not only ensure you survive this ordeal, but that you prevail and you succeed. And you're one of the businesses at the end of this that's actually doing really, really well. And so I thought that was absolutely priceless. The whole presentation is awesome. But in particular, I found that last bit from Luke to be particularly inspiring. And I even suggested he stick a Rocky soundtrack behind it and use it as some kind of marketing or advertising campaign, which he thought was quite humorous. Anyway, and lastly, there will be a PDF of some sort for you to download on the blog for this episode. If you just go to highintensitybusiness.com and look out for Rec Focus, which will be in the title, you can search that. And there'll be some kind of PDF, either a transcript or maybe some bonuses from the actual presentation itself, maybe some slideshows, something like that. Anyway, I will not waste any more of your time. And so without any further ado, please enjoy the Rec Focus podcast.
Yeah, I want to welcome everybody to Focus, our first ever virtual Rec event. So thanks for jumping on with us. We have just a tremendous amount of participants. We have some incredible speakers joining us. And so it's going to be a great few hours, an opportunity to come together and learn from each other. And we're definitely going to have a slanting today toward how do we navigate through this COVID season that we're in right now. So we want to definitely speak to that issue. So I'd like to walk us through an activity to start off with. It'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll get into our first real keynote presentation from Dr. James Fisher. So I want to walk through an activity that's been probably inspired by Dr. Stephen Covey. So Stephen Covey talks about the idea of working within your circle of influence and spend very little time in your circle of concern. So what can you actually influence or control, and what can you not control? So I want to walk through an activity right now where we just talk about, in this COVID situation that we're in, and I'm going to frame this up toward the HIIT studio, but my goodness, I can't imagine too many businesses. I can't imagine too many contexts where this doesn't apply. I want to walk through and talk about what can we not control and what can we control? And you're going to answer this question. So I want you to tell me, what are the things that we cannot control right now? And you're just going to go to the bottom of your screen. Don't go to Q&A, go to chat. If you just click on chat, you can submit your answer for what can we not control right now. So I'm going to start off with two answers that are pretty obvious, and then Hannah's going to feed them to me. We can't control the government, right? So whether it's government or politicians, that's outside of our control. And I'm certain we can't control the virus itself. So Hannah, you can read these off to me, and we'll get a good list of all the things that we can't control.
So we also have length of shutdown.
Okay, which is really probably government, right? I'll put it up there, but I think it's probably government. Length of closure. What else?
How clients react.
How clients react. I would argue that we probably can control that. I mean, we can shape that at least. We'll put it up there.
You wanna write on the other side of the column?
That's a great idea, Hannah. That's a great. I'm going to do this. What else?
Client's financial situation.
Yeah, great. Client's income.
And that's all we have right now. Oh, what clients hear from the media? Fear.
Sure. We can't control the media. Fear factor. It's a great list. Now, I put these up here because I think they're valid, but the length of the closure, I just think probably loops into government, right? Client reaction, how they react. We're going to have some influence on that, but we definitely can't control it. We can definitely influence it. So I think we need kind of like a strong question mark here. So we definitely have 1 for sure, 2, we'll call this 3, 4, 5, 6 factors that we definitely can't control. So now, putting that aside, I want a list of the things that we can control going forward.
Attitude. Look at that beard. Being proactive. Mindset.
I'm going to write beard length.
Effort.
Mindset. Effort.
Strategy and plan.
The plan.
Motivation. Communication. Messaging to clients.
Okay. Communication with clients, which is, I would say, just messaging to clients.
Expenses. Our own learning and growing. Quality of the workout delivered virtually.
Okay. Quality of a virtual workout.
Our own health practices.
Virtual workout. Love that. Our own health practices. What else?
Educating clients and others. Leadership.
I'll just put our education efforts. What else?
Our own workouts, energy, our mental well-being, who we spend time with.
Ooh, our circles. Love it.
Creativity. Fostering supportive community within our circle of influence.
Okay, what else?
Continuing education, healthy financial habits.
I'm going to say our continuing education is going to be under, I think we had learning somewhere in here. I'll put it up here.
How much media we consume.
Ooh, yes.
Caffeine intake.
Who said that?
Lawrence.
Okay, so where are we going with this? When we complete this activity, when we really do it well, we realize there's only a few variables that we can't control, right? I think it starts with government, it's virus. Related to that is the length of the closure. We can't control the psychology of our clients. We can't control what happens to their jobs and the fear that maybe the media largely creates. But man, we just did this for a couple of minutes. Was that 6-7 minutes of going through this? And we come up with 20 things that we can actually control. And so we want the rest of this conversation to be guided around, to really be rooted in the things that we can actually control. And I'm going to talk about this later when I get a chance to present, but I'm going to make a strong case for the brands that are doing well right now. Those are the brands that have spent zero time in their circle of concern, and they've spent all of their time in their circle of control. So the idea that if you can't control it, don't spend any time on it. I think we're enamored with intellectual discussions around some of these other things. I mean, you take a look at social media. You look at so many of your friends and colleagues and business leaders that you know, their social media. The conversation is around so many of these things, and I think these are fascinating discussions. I was in on a meeting on Tuesday. We went through 2 hours of the pathophysiology of COVID-19. And these were all business leaders in on it. And at some point I had to say, okay, I don't think we need to learn any more about the pathophysiology because none of us can control it. And there's so many things that we can control. Let's spend all of our time on that. And let me tell you, that was a fascinating conversation. It just wasn't a fruitful conversation. So this is going to kind of be our mindset as we walk into all of Focus today. With that, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. James Fisher from Solent University. This would be his 8th live rec conference in a row. He's going to talk to us today about the impacts of stress on strength training on stress. So let's give a warm virtual rec welcome to Dr. Fisher.
Hi, everybody. First of all, it was great to see so many people that I would normally see at the rec sort of responding then to Luke. So Peter and Diana and Mike and just everybody's name flashing up there. So hello to everybody. It's great to virtually see you. I'm going to click to share screen now, and hopefully this will all work out. I should be well versed at doing this with my students now, doing virtual lectures under the circumstances. We'll see how it goes. Tell you what, we'll start from the first slide, not the last slide. So I wanted to talk a bit about strength training and stress. And I'm not going to directly relate this back to sort of the physiological stress of COVID-19 and everything that's going on there. I wanted to just talk about this in general. I actually started preparing some of this content for a rec conference a few years back, and then took it out and decided I didn't have time to add it, to include it. But I'm fascinated by it. So it seemed like a great chance to sort of bring it up for a short conversation. So there's a few key studies, and the main author that you're going to see crop up here is this guy, John Bartholomew. Hopefully you can see my cursor here as well. And he's really the main guy that's done all the research on this. So if you're really interested, then look at his name or send me an email and I'll send you some of the papers. So the first study is looking at the short-term response to exercise based on psychological stress. So it's a group of college students, 22 males, 9 females, as you can see, and they completed 2 stress questionnaires. So the perceived chronic mental stress, which is abbreviated to the PSS, and the undergraduate stress inventory, abbreviated to the USQ. And what they did is they then had them perform an acute bout of exercise. Now, I've put the table straight up here, and hopefully you all can see that properly. If there's any problem with seeing the slides, then please send me an email and I will happily share these slides, or maybe I can share them with Luke and Hannah and they can circulate them. The MIF is simply a measure of maximal isometric force, and that was really the key thing that they were looking at. So they did a pre-measure, and then they did a measure immediately post-workout, 20, 40, and 60 minutes post-workout as well. Now, the workout itself is quite intense and probably not very relatable for the high-intensity, low-volume community. But if we look here, apart from the fact that there's a squat jump phase and then a power bike phase, there's then 10 sets of ascending load a 3-minute rest, and then 6 maximal sets, all taken to exhaustion before maximal isometric tests, and then more squat, jumps, power bikes, and then a cool down, and so forth. Anyway, so what they did is I've included this picture because they did the exercise sets on a modified 45-degree leg press, so it's easy to see it in that format. So you can imagine doing 10 sets on that, and then pausing for 3 minutes, and then doing 6 further maximal sets. That is not hugely comfortable. They then divided the groups based on the questionnaires. So the USQ was the undergraduate stress inventory, and the PSS was the perceived chronic mental stress questionnaire. And they divided them into low stress, moderate stress, and high stress. So the low stress will always be the dotted line, moderate, the dashed line, and high stress will be the solid line. And that's going to be consistent throughout this and the next study that I'm going to talk about. And the key thing that we can see is even at baseline, there was a bit of a difference between the 3 groups, I should say, based on the way they divided the participants. But certainly immediately following exercise and as they progressed over the 20-14, 60 minutes, the rate of recovery, the acute response to that exercise was far better based on isometric force, based on the amount of force they could produce with a single muscular contraction in the lower stress groups. So our immediate acute response is certainly impacted by our current psychological stress. Now, these were students, and I'm not going to get into the questions, but they were a variety of questions based on finance, based on family, based on other things around their health or their accommodation or their course and so on and so forth. But they're not things that we should be dissimilar with or disassociate with, because they're probably things that are maybe smaller stresses in our lives, but maybe larger stresses in our lives as we mature. If we look at the actual data itself, and I've included I've sort of shown this up here for the low stress and the high stress group, and then they've shown the mean for all subjects here. So again, pre-acute exercise session, there was a marginal difference between the 2 groups, but it's probably not that big. But we can see, again, this is pretty consistent throughout. So whether it is or it isn't big or not is irrelevant, because it's consistent. The higher stress group are simply not able to produce as much force as the lower stress group based on the questionnaires that they completed, and certainly based on the recovery, the acute recovery. So the next study is really a follow-on. It's by the same 2 main authors, and there's a 3rd author on this one as well. And it's actually a development of the same study, but extrapolated over the next 96 hours. So presumably they had the same participants come back in at 24, 48, and 96 hours. So we'll see from this graph now that this is the pre-exercise again. This is the 1 hour post, 24 hours post, 48 hours post, and then 96 hours post. My apologies, I've just done something with the view of everybody and I've lost it. There we go, I've got it back. So we can see again the low stress group were responding far more favorably following the acute exercise bout, as a result, based solely on their lower stress levels, their lower chronic stress levels. And the same thing for the other questionnaire, the perceived chronic mental stress questionnaire. And we can see a typical trend in the acute response in maximal isometric force. There's an immediate drop, there's a gradual increase, again, over the subsequent 96 hours. And in this group, we even see the kind of typical recovery and then maybe a dip after recovery. But it's certainly in the high stress group, we see that this almost never really seems to recover back to where it was. However, they also looked at a few other variables. So they looked at perceived physical energy. So looked at a few sort of psychological variables that I find really interesting here. So perceived physical energy. So again, the low stress group were reporting that their perceived energy, even at 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours post this very intense, very high volume acute bout of exercise, their energy level was higher than the moderate and the high stress group. If I move on, the perceived physical fatigue was lower in the low stress group than the moderate and the higher stress groups at certainly at the 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours. And we can see based on these curves that they widen with time. So the lower stress groups seem to make a quicker recovery, and certainly in 96 hours, that's where we're seeing the largest difference in perceived energy and perceived fatigue. And then the final one here is muscular soreness, and this one doesn't have the same degree of change at the 96 hour mark, but we can certainly see a similar trend that the soreness is lower in the lower stress groups compared to the moderate and higher stress groups. If I move on to the numerical data that they report, so they talk about isometric force. They also looked at jump height. So this was their peak jump height that was briefly mentioned in the first one, but wasn't actually reported. And this was the cycle power. Now, I'm not going to get too bogged down by those values because they might be more based on neurology than sort of morphological or other sort of stress factors. But if we have a brief look at this again, our low stress values are certainly far higher maximal isometric force, and this is percentage of recovery. So at 24, 48, 72, and then 96 hours, they're nearly at full recovery, whereas the highest stress group is still quite a way off. And then we see similar data for the jump height and for the cycle power. Okay, so this is the last study I'm going to talk about, and you'll have to forgive me. I've lost all concept of time with this presentation. I'm used to a timer being running the screen, so bear with me with that. This was actually an intervention study, and this was really nice. So 81 males and 54 females in a 12-week supervised training intervention. So again, they were college students. I think they were detailed as recreationally active, which is a bit of a catch-all that says they might do some exercise now and then, but it's certainly not a structured resistance training program. So a supervised training program, they trained twice a week for 1 to 1.5 hours per week. And they did a typical workout, which included 9 exercises, upper body exercises of things like bench press, incline press, overhead press, biceps, triceps, so on and so forth, and lower body exercises such as squat and leg press. And they completed the Adolescent Perceived Events Scale, the APES. Now, I should clarify, these are questionnaires that I'm not massively familiar with. I have looked at them briefly based on these studies, but Emma might be able to allude to them later or not. I don't mean to drop her in that. This is certainly a lot larger questionnaire, 207-item questionnaire, evaluating sort of level of positive and negative life events. So they were already able to sort of divide them based on a low stress and high stress as they began the exercise intervention and continuing throughout. And I've really only got this table to report back from this study because this kind of says it all. So this is the bench press. This is the back squat, the second row down. This is the arm size. So I think it was measured by ultrasound, and this is the thigh size. So we can see the bench press, pretty similar. These were all pretty similar beforehand. You could argue that they're very marginally higher in the low stress group compared to the high stress group. But, you know, over a lifetime, you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be a huge difference. The key thing that we see is over this 12-week intervention, the low stress group make, potentially notably greater changes than the higher stress group that's consistent for every variable. So the bench press is listed here. We can see, the difference, the absolute difference here, and then the percentage change. We can see our squat difference here and our percentage change, our arm size difference here and percentage change, and our thigh size here and our percentage change. So again, the key thing with this that we're seeing is when we're under a degree or a greater degree of psychological stress, our adaptation to resistance exercise is certainly not as pronounced and not as efficient, not as positive as it might be if we were able to be in a lower stress environment. And that's one of the reasons why I think Emma following on from this would be great, because I think a lot of this comes back to how we maybe manage our stress. So I've got a few sort of final points to add into this. A common response, an interesting study that I haven't talked about today, but talked about trained people when they are suddenly in high stress environments. And a common response is to do more exercise. Now, this study wasn't conducted in the high intensity training community where low volume and low frequency training is far more prevalent. But it might be almost inadvertent that we undergo degrees of psychological stress, or we experience stressful times. And because of our desire to kind of alleviate that stress, we lean on our workouts a little bit more, whether that's to become more active or do more workouts or whatever that might be. And the data certainly seem to support that. A higher stress level, if a higher stress level is negatively impacting our training, then we might be inclined to do more. So we know that a common response to people that aren't making positive adaptations to their training is often to do more. Now, again, that might not be true of ourselves, because we appreciate the need for sort of rest and recovery, but it might be true of our clients that are trying to do more exercise. And ultimately, this is not just guidance for us as people that exercise and perform resistance training. It's guidance for your clients who might be undertaking home or virtual workouts and are adapting their workouts based on that, and might choose to now train more frequently or so forth. And I think another thing that we have to consider in the present moment is that we might perceive our current training methods to be substandard, whether that's based on the training that we're performing, whether that's based on the tools that we're using, whether that's based on the degree of supervision. And if we perceive that that's negatively impacting our adaptations, then that might add to our degree of stress, and that might encourage us to then do more and be more active and perform more training. Speaking on a personal level, my initial response when there was sort of the social distancing and the lockdown measures here in the UK was to get out my pull-up bar and hang it from the doorway and do a lot more sort of bodyweight exercise. But I found that I was training sort of almost every other day. And for the first couple of weeks, I probably did 3 or 4 workouts per week, which is not a ridiculously high volume for many people we know who perform resistance training. But actually, we know it's a lot more than is necessary and might even be too much for positive adaptations. So I think we have to sort of manage that. With all that in mind, we've got to remember these are stressful times, and prolonged stress can be negative, whether it's physiological or psychological. So we can run ourselves into a vicious circle with this. We do more exercise, we add our physiological stress, our stress hormones are elevated for longer or are elevated to a higher degree. And so our body is undergoing the same degree of stress, whether that is physiologically or psychologically. Now, the flip side of this is we know that some exercise stress, and this is deemed moderate volumes of a moderate intensity, and that's really the only way that the research can talk about this. So we can't take that necessarily to mean high effort resistance training. We just know it's sort of manageable volumes of a manageable intensity can be good for the immune system. A lot of studies around this have looked at the difference between recreational and recreational sort of runners right up to marathon runners. And they've looked at kind of mileage per week. And up to a certain amount of mileage, there's sort of seem to be positive effects for the immune system. But beyond that, the effects seem to be far more detrimental. And we sort of see a negative response from this higher volume or higher volume and intensity of exercise. When we look at why stress might be good for our immune system, or why exercise stress might be good for our immune system, and why it might be good for decreasing our psychological stress, we can look through a simple process of saying, well, we know that resistance training, we know exercise as a whole can serve to improve our sleep patterns, serve to reduce anxiety, serve to improve nutrition patterns. People that care about the exercise that they're doing and the exercise that they perform often take more time with their nutritional habits. And certainly one of the key things that's cropped up, and I think is very pertinent to this community, is that exercise can be a form of mindfulness because of the mental distraction from our other stresses and because of our mental focus. And I think within the high intensity training community where technique is particularly important, that mental focus or that mindfulness might be important because of a switch in mental focus to the exercise technique itself. Now, with all of that in mind, there's really only one final point, and what my sort of take-home message to all of this is that we really should be managing our stress like we manage our training. We might think that by managing our training, we are managing our physiological stress, but I think there's a lot from a psychological perspective that maybe we can do, especially under the current environment, to maybe take better care of ourselves and still see positive adaptations with ourselves and with our clients. I know that many people are going into sort of virtual workouts, and the priority is to continue to deliver a resistance training protocol for clients. But are we able to contribute or add to that with other things that might help people manage their sort of day-to-day stresses that might be elevated at this time, which might serve to then enhance their adaptation to the resistance training protocol that's being delivered. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that have come up now.
So now the way you're going to ask questions is simply use the chat, and Hannah will continue to feed these questions to James, and we have plenty of time for some great questions. And I'll go ahead and make the note now that we do not have to limit the questions purely to these slides. It's a great chance to ask James questions on all things strength and hypertrophy.
Bryce put a question in the chat, but Bryce, if you want to raise your hand, you can ask this question out loud. So click on participate.
Or I can see these in the chat. So do you want me just to respond to them as they come up?
Yeah, if you want to read off Bryce's, you can, but then other people, we should just raise your hand and we'll go off of that.
Yeah, actually, Wayne commented before that, define, manage stress. And that's a really, really great question that I don't have a clear-cut answer to. I think that and maybe this lends itself to Bryce's question as well, so I'll highlight that and then try to answer them together. Bryce asked, it's interesting that the primary measure of stress was a subjective questionnaire. Do I think a subjective perception of stress is as, or perhaps even more important than a biomarker of stress, such as cortisol? Well, I think that there are definitely physiological markers that we can use, such as cortisol levels. but they might be completely impractical in your environment with your clients or in a day-to-day home environment. So I think that subjective measures of stress can be, as efficient and potentially even more efficient. It would be interesting to see how they relate to each other, what the correlation is like between the two. And I don't know of any data, so forgive me. But Wayne, you said define, manage stress. Well, it might be that we look at our sleep patterns, we look at our resting heart rate levels. If we track anything that simple, we look at our sort of nutritional habits. Stress can often, result in kind of other cravings around foods that we might not normally consume and things like that. We might look at our responses to exercise. So if we are not, if we have a delayed recovery, but more than that, we probably have to assume that the current environment is incurring a greater degree of stress simply because it's a change. I think most people respond with a kind of a natural stress response when there's a great change in their kind of life. So if you are currently undergoing sort of social distancing and sort of being encouraged to stay at home as much as you can, then there is almost certainly a degree of stress because of the way you might socialize or the way you might interact or the way you have that routine and so forth. And I'm going to use a really loose example with this. I have a 2-year-old son, and for the first week or so, he didn't seem to know what to do with himself because both myself and my wife were at home, 24 hours a day. And he was out of routine from when he would be at nursery or when he would be at sort of a rugby class or a gym class or whatever it might be. So, and he now, of course, absolutely loves it. But there was a natural kind of stress response. And I think we both had a similar response to being at home with each other and a 2-year-old. So let me move on.
We have a question from Richard Chartrand, which I'm going to let him talk here. Go ahead, Richard.
Hey, hi, thank you very much for putting this together, first of all, and for taking the time. My question had to do with not what your presentation today was, but my understanding that you did joint study with Luke about pre-exhaustion and whether or not it was beneficial. And at least in that study, you seem to indicate that there was no clear advantage to pre-exhaustion. I know that people have somewhat challenged that it has a place in rehab and things like that, but over and above that, it just seems to me that there's a lot of context that can go into that, just one study. Do you see sort of maybe limitations in the studies that you did that would suggest that's still a question that's not been thoroughly answered, or do you feel satisfied that that's a conclusion that you would hang your hat on about no real advantage to pre-exhaustion techniques?
Luke, do you want me to take that or do you want to take that?
You should take it, James.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I'd say is no research study is perfect. So I think that was a very robust study that we did. I think that we looked at obvious markers such as strength or muscular performance and body composition adaptations. You could look at hypertrophy with biopsy, or you could look at hypertrophy with ultrasound and things like that. These far more complex measures. We might look at maximal isometric force. And the reality of that study is it was what we've generally termed an ecologically valid study. It was real people in the real world doing real workouts. If I go back and I do that kind of study with, the sexy measures of ultrasound and biopsy and isometric force, then it's far, far more time consuming. It's almost certainly going to be a young male population because that's what I have access to as my university students. So there are limitations anywhere we go. If you're asking me, do I think that there's still a use for pre-exhaustion training, then yes, I absolutely do think there's use for pre-exhaustion training. I think it's a great tool to have for variety. I think it's a great tool to enhance intensity for people that can't reach true momentary failure from a single set of a multi-joint exercise. And probably the best way to think about this was a discussion I had with Roger Schwab a few years back, where he said that as we get stronger, performing only the multi-joint movements applies a greater degree of stress on our joints. So, for example, an overhead press or a chest press is applying. If we go straight into those exercises, then we're going to use a progressively heavier load that's going to apply more and more stress on those joints, on the shoulder joints specifically. If we pre-exhaust with a pec fly or a dumbbell fly or a lateral raise or whatever it might be, then we can immediately decrease the load with the multi-joint exercise, and therefore decrease the potential stress on those joints. And I think this is a really, really good point. So where can research go with pre-exhaustion? Well, as far as your mind can take you, we can look at it through a rehabilitative perspective. We can look at it through an older adult's perspective. We can look at it through, longer term studies or the enjoyment of variation and so forth. So I really think there's a lot more that can be done. And I don't think that study suggests that you shouldn't do pre-exhaustion. I think one of the key things that study highlights is the importance of taking a set to momentary failure to induce that degree of muscle damage and that degree of motor unit recruitment and muscle fiber recruitment. And I think that's the priority take home from that study. I hope that answers that question.
All right, John Kelly has a question for you.
He's muted on my screen.
I know. I don't know why. John, we're going to get to you, I promise. Let's try to put up Logan and then get back to John. Okay, Logan, you have too old of a version of Zoom, so it's not going to let you do that. So let's get back into the chat section. And Richard Wolf asks, speaking of indirect effect, have you come across other studies linking better eating habits due to proactive strength training?
I guess there's two ways to interpret that, and without going the long way through re-asking the question. I don't know of any studies that have looked at better eating habits being more efficacious with strength training than kind of junk food eating habits. Are there studies that have compared, sensible eating habits to junk food eating habits on muscle hypertrophy and strength adaptations? Not that I know of. Most of them have simply looked at protein intake and have generally used protein supplement intake, so whey or leucine or so forth. If the question is asking, do people that do resistance training, is there evidence to support that people that do resistance training, do they have better nutritional habits? I don't know. Again, I don't know of any research that supports that. But I would hypothesize that people that do things to take care of their body in one way probably do things to look after their health and their well-being in other ways as well. So there's no research that I can cite for that. So sorry.
Lawrence Neal wants to know what you are doing to manage your stress.
Yeah, I saw that one come up, and it's a great question. And we spoke earlier today because he has a young son as well. So Faith, my wife, and I are both keen cyclists. So we make a point of giving each other, probably an hour and a half or so each day to get out the house, to go and get on a bike and blast a quick ride, and you could be able to come back and kind of shower in relative tranquility without the responsibility of a child. And I think that's really important to have because it serves to retain our own identity. It's for me personally, because I'm still doing a lot of virtual lecturing and my day job hasn't stopped in the same way that hers has. My identity is still as an academic and as a researcher and as a lecturer, and I still have, a huge amount of contact with my students. But I can imagine, and I'm speaking for my wife now, which I was always told I should never do. But she's a physiotherapist, and her clinic closed down as soon as the social distancing came in. So to some extent, she's potentially lost that identity. So how she might manage that stress is maybe more important. It's really interesting because there are huge benefits to being able to spend this much time with each other and with our son. Like I said, our son is 2 years old. We know that when we spend a prolonged time with him, his speech develops at an incredible rate, and things like that, his learning level. So that's really exciting to see. But the flip side of that is we kind of lose a little bit of who we are. So really it's about giving each other enough time to be away. And like we said, out of the house on a bike. We're going through some unbelievable weather right now in the UK. So being out on a bike is just an absolute pleasure. So that's the long answer for that question. Sorry.
James, can you see Peter Rana's question?
Is it the one from Monique?
No, the one above that.
Oh. James, if my recall is correct, it's been said that the body, physiology, perceives physically induced stress and everyday psychological and emotional the same. Is this true? And if so, a conscious effort should be adjusting between the two. Would you agree? I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a neurophysiologist to say that I know that they do perceive stress in exactly the same way. I think from a physiological response of things like cortisol level, and based on the physical response that we saw in the studies that I talked about in maximal isometric force, then I think that there is certainly great links between the way our body responds to physiological and psychological stress. So whether it's exactly the same or not, I can't comment. The second part was a conscious effort should be adjusting between the two. I think that we are all, one of the reasons why I've talked about this today and why I think Emma's value in this sort of session will be so great is we are probably all great at looking at our exercise habits and looking at recording and planning and structuring our own and our clients' exercise habits. One of the key things that we often might not take into account is that our clients might come in having had a particularly bad day, and that might positively or negatively impact their workouts, or that might positively or negatively impact their response to the workout that you do with them today in preparation for their next workout or their prolonged workouts. So I think that there should be greater time taken to sort of at least be mindful of psychological stress. And like I said, I don't specifically want to talk about COVID-19, but I think that in itself is applying a degree of stress to the world right now, whether it's economically or socially or psychologically. And we're all kind of undergoing something. So I definitely think that there should be a conscious effort or a consciousness of the stress that we undergo, whether it's physiological or psychological. So
a question from Monique. Would it be a good idea for clients to hook up with an HRV monitor to determine how high or low our heart rate variability will determine when we train or not?
Yeah, heart rate variability is an interesting one. I think that we can get too bogged down with this kind of thing. I think from a practical perspective, no, it's probably not. It's probably not something that we necessarily need to encourage. If we have a client who isn't necessarily making positive adaptations to a program, then and we under day-to-day training or following a client lifestyle questionnaire, if we use that kind of thing, then we identify that there are more stressful times in their life. Maybe we manage workouts around that time. So, for example, someone I know has targets to meet at the end of every quarter. So at the end of every quarter, he almost walks in from work, locks himself away from his family and carries on working, and all the other factors around his life kind of diminish quite to quite a high extent. So I think that we should just be more aware of that kind of thing. It might be that with some clients we look at maybe encouraging them to look at their resting heart rate, which might be indicative of their sleep patterns. Most fitness trackers that you can wear on the wrist now will monitor heart rate, and if we are going to bed late, or if we are eating late, then it might negatively impact resting heart rate. Or if we're in high stress situations, we might not show the same same heart rate recovery. So I think that there are ways that we can encourage people to do that without necessarily going down the route of trying to hook up with all of our clients to look at heart rate variability.
So last question, for recommendations to our clients who are feeling a lack of activity, would you recommend less activity but a higher level of intensity, or more activity at the moment but a more moderate level of intensity? Or does it depend on the current level of stress?
Yeah, I think, again, this is trying to take the approach of one size fits all. And when it comes to stress, we really don't know. So this is where, I state those questionnaires, and when you look at the slides again, when you have access to them, I think it's worth maybe trying to dig out those questionnaires and seeing which one might be something that you could use within a gym environment to look at the stress level of your clients. It might be that you encourage more physical activity. So if you find that somebody is hugely sedentary because of their day job, sat at a computer all day, then you encourage more physical activity, you encourage more mindfulness, you encourage more, I believe Emma's going to do some breathing practical sessions following this. It might be that you encourage more fresh air and UV rays. It might be that we encourage more frequent workouts that are of a lower volume. So instead of them being 12 to 15 exercises, they go down to 5 or 6 exercises, and it becomes a split routine, which might be far more manageable right now in a home-based environment. So I think that there are multiple ways that we can approach this. And this is where, to be honest, you guys as practitioners are far more clued in on this kind of thing. Really, all I'm doing is saying, are we looking at this facet? As practitioners, it's how you guys use that and manage that, I think, is really the key. And there are probably multiple ways. Like I said, I'm cycling and trying to get on the bike for probably an hour or so a day. But that is out in, like I said, the weather right now in the UK is fantastic. So I get some sunshine, I get some fresh air. Because of social distancing, there is less traffic on the roads. So it's a perfect time to be cycling. And I think that is doing a great job in helping me manage my sort of stresses around work and around the COVID-19 and lockdown and state of the economy and politics and government. And you turn on the news and probably the first thing we see is the number of deaths from COVID-19 every day in our country or globally or whatever it might be, and then how long this lockdown might last for. So and we're naturally going to be stressed by that. I just think that's unavoidable. So I think just even being aware that can impact us and aware of how we might respond to that, whether that's with a psychological response, whether that's with a nutritional response, the way we change our diet, whether that's with an exercise response to train more frequently or do more or do less. We just talking about it is kind of the first thing, and then how we move forward is probably down to the individual and down to individual philosophies. So.
Fantastic. James, thank you. Great questions. I'm not sure how late James will be able to stay with us because it's getting close to 10 p.m. his time, but a great opportunity to ask questions later when we kind of get into the informal happy hour. And if you can't stick with us, we understand, but we appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate you joining us so late on a Thursday night. Before we move into our next presenter, I just want to take the briefest of moments to thank a couple of our rec sponsors. They were lined up to sponsor the March conference. They're going to sponsor when we reschedule for November. And those two sponsors are MedX. So MedX is fully functioning. I've been talking to their president, Charlie Barth, on a weekly basis. They're manufacturing machines. They just sold an Avenger leg press that was scheduled to come to Minneapolis for the rec conference. They really feel good about their future and some of the innovations they've made to some of their products. So MedX, thank you so much for sponsoring this event and sponsoring the conference in November. And then their sponsor I want to touch base on and give a thank you to right now is ARX. So ARX has sponsored the last couple of recs. They were on board for March. They're going to be with us in November with some equipment live. So thank you to MedX. And thank you so much to ARX sponsoring everything we're doing tonight and sponsoring the upcoming conference this fall. So now I'd love to transition to Dr. Emma Mosley. Dr. Mosley is at Solent University with James. She's a lecturer and a researcher. And I started talking to James about the topic of stress, and he said she would be an absolute brilliant addition to our event. So Emma, thank you so much for staying up late and for joining us. And I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for having me. Let me just figure out my screen share. Hopefully we can get this going. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a really interesting format for me to be presenting in, for one, but also it's a really nice opportunity for me to present to a slightly different audience because obviously my background is in sports psychology. So usually I'd be presenting to kind of athletes or maybe the more kind of general population. So this is a really interesting opportunity for me to be able to present to people in the fitness industry. So my kind of theme for the presentation today is actually just teaching you a little bit about a stress reduction technique that I'm particularly interested in. And it's kind of come off the back of my PhD research. And it's all about slow pace breathing. So Monique, I'm already a fan of you because I can see that you're doing some slow diaphragmatic breathing. So you'll be an ace at this already. The first thing that I really wanted to kind of do is set the scene for stress. So if we imagine we're not in this particular situation that we're in right now, I've got some kind of facts and figures on the screen here that really kind of show you, the prevalence of stress. So I have some facts and figures from the UK, and then I also researched some from the US as well to obviously make sure this applied to everyone. So if I just quickly pop these up on the screen, we can see that stress is a massive factor in our daily well-being and our health. And obviously that's why it receives so much attention in terms of research literature. We often see stress as a factor to us not being able to work. And we've almost kind of seen a shift now. So we're now not working, and then that's causing stress. So we're always going to have stress in our lives, regardless of the situations. And some of the other factors that I actually looked at in terms of the American side of stress was from the American Psychological Association. They do a Stress in America report every year, which I actually found really interesting. And some of the kind of highest things that they found on there was potentially mass shootings, and also the healthcare system can cause stress. And actually 83% of the US workforce apparently suffer with work-related stress. So even before we were in this situation, stress was a big deal. And it will continue to be a big deal as we move through this as well. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is a very simple, free technique that we can use to help reduce our stress. But what I also want to do is actually talk about the science behind it, why it works, and actually the kind of psychophysiological reactions we can have as a result of simply slowing our breathing rate down. Just to give a little bit of context and a little bit of history, it very much comes from this kind of yoga-based practicing of pranayama. So if we actually kind of split this word down, prana means breath or your energy, and pranayama is very much the control of the breath. And obviously, it's very much a conscious process. So it's definitely something that we are going to consciously control, bring into our day-to-day lives so we can actually control our stress. So firstly, let's have a quick look at some of the research that's out there to kind of discuss these benefits of why slowing our breathing down is actually going to help with our stress levels. So in a reasonably recent systematic review, they looked at actually the benefits of breath control. So being able to control your breath, slow it down on the psychophysiological correlates of slow breathing. So within this, they looked at heart rate variability. They also looked at EEG, which is obviously a measure of brain function. Now, from the 15 studies that actually made it into this review, they found the following. So by doing breath control, we can improve our brain activity, which is great. That might mean we have increased productivity. It might mean we have better decision making. They also found that it improved heart rate variability, which is an indicator of our ability to self-regulate in stressful environments, for example. What they also found was there was an increase in relaxation, so feelings of relaxation. They also found comfort and pleasantness were also increased across the studies, as well as vigor, so kind of energy, and also alertness. So all of those things that we actually want, particularly when we're maybe not in our usual working environment and we need to be able to either relax from stresses from the outside world or perhaps give us some more energy. And in addition, what they also found was there was a decrease in arousal. So when we feel stressed, we often have an increase in arousal. They found that it decreased anxiety and depression. And we also saw within this review that it also decreased anger and confusion. So, across 15 studies, they did find these systematic results, which is really quite impressive when we think about how simple the technique is. And just kind of touching on the research that I've been involved with, I firstly want to pose a question, particularly if we're thinking about how much more our maybe media intake, particularly social media intake, has increased in this time. How many of you are looking at your phone before you go to sleep? How many of you have got your news app and you've got the alerts coming up and of, like James was saying, all of this very sad and depressing news? And how often are you looking at your phone? Because obviously your phone can actually be a cause of stress. So putting your phone down is also something that's really beneficial. So what we did in this study is we actually looked at comparing the influence of slow-paced breathing across 30 days. They did it for 15 minutes a day before sleep, in comparison to social media use. Okay, so that included Instagram searching, WhatsApp, Facebook, things like that. And what we found in this study was actually across those 30 days, there was an increase in subjective sleep quality. Great. Okay, so actually we're getting better sleep, which might mean we can train harder. It might also mean that we're more productive. But also they found overnight there was an increase in cardiac vagal activity, which is a measure associated to heart rate variability, very much associated to our parasympathetic system. So that system that's involved in rest and recovery. So all in all, the evidence is starting to look pretty positive for perhaps just picking up this breathing technique. And I've got one more study that I just kind of wanted to mention. This is a study that we did really recently. It's actually on my to-do list, my long to-do list to keep me busy during this time. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at high-performing athletes, but actually student athletes, because they're usually a population group that have high levels of stress because they're competing, but they're also having to do university studies at the same time. So what we did in this study is we actually educated them about breathing, why it's important. So a lot like the kind of education you guys are getting now. We also looked at their cognitive performance. So we looked at a Stroop test, which is looking at something called inhibition. And we also measured heart rate variability for that cardiac vagal activity measure. We don't have results from it yet, but what I am going to share is after the 4-week intervention where they were doing breathing daily for 5 minutes, we did a focus group to really see how the students found the process. So these are some of the quotes, which I thought some of them you might find really interesting. So one of the athletes was actually using the breathing in the gym. So when they were holding very, very difficult positions, he said like in a core session, so maybe holding a plank, for example, or in the last set, like he says there. He used it to maintain shape, perhaps get rid of pain, maybe. We also see that athletes were using it to reduce their nerves before matches. Most of them were using it before sleep. That was definitely an overriding theme that we got from the focus group. So we can see that there's lots of benefits for kind of everyday life, but also people that are performing and perhaps your clients as well. So let's think about why this actually works. So we're just going to quite simply think about the link between the heart and the lungs. So when we're actually breathing, there are direct changes in the heart. So our heart and lungs are inextricably linked, and it's something that we can harness, and it's known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So I'm hoping this is going to work. So I'm going to get you guys to pop your fingers on your pulses. Okay, so you can, I'm sure you know where to find it. So wrist or neck or something like that. And what I want you to do is you're going to follow this breath pacer. As the green ball goes up, you're going to inhale. As the green ball goes down, you're going to exhale. So I'll just mute it because otherwise we're going to have waves in the background as well. So fingers on pulses. Hopefully it's working for you. It's working for me. And breathing in as the green ball goes up and breathing out as the green ball goes down. So as you're doing this, I just want you to really focus on what's happening to your pulse rate. So what should be happening is as you're breathing in, your heart rate is increasing, and as you're breathing out, your heart rate is slowing down. We will come back to this breath pacer, don't worry. And this is very much hypothesized to be a relationship between our body trying to be as efficient as physically possible when we're faced with any kind of metabolic or behavioral kind of demand. So for example, when we're maybe, starting to do a run or starting to do exercise, obviously we need an increase in heart rate. But also if our breathing rate and our heart rate can actually work together, we find that we're more efficient. I'm not going to comment too much on the physiology, but if we think about psychology, that then allows us to potentially make better decisions, think more clearly under pressure, and allows us to control potentially damaging feelings and activation in competition, for example. So it is something that's really, really important and does promote a lot of benefits. So what we're doing is we're increasing heart rate variability through using respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So in terms of how you actually do slow-paced breathing, a lot of you might be already familiar with this, but we're really focusing on belly breathing. And that, again, is something that really kind of comes from yoga practice. But what I want you to think about is roughly how often do you think you are breathing per minute? So what we would term these as is cycles per minute. So what's the kind of average rate that you would think about in terms of how often am I breathing per minute? So usually breaths per minute is around 12 to 20. Obviously, that will be influenced by fitness, etc. But for slow-paced breathing, the average is just 6. So we're almost halving, in most cases, halving the amount of breaths that we're actually taking. So that is a huge difference. So that's the first thing that we have to think about. It's much, much slower than how we would normally be breathing. So again, I'm going to try and do a little bit of interaction. It may or may not work. But I'm just going to teach you some very, very quick things that you need to do when you're doing this breathing technique. So the first thing that you can do, and there's no reason, if you're already familiar with this, or perhaps this is something that you kind of knew about and you wanted to learn a little bit more about it, this is something that you can use with your clients. So you can then educate them on how to breathe properly and effectively. So the first thing that I would always do is put one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. I'll move my screen down a little bit so you can see. And as you're kind of slowing your breathing down, your chest shouldn't move at all. Okay, so you're going to inhale through the nose. And as you're inhaling, your stomach should start to inflate. So your bottom hand should definitely be moving. And as you breathe out, we breathe out through pursed lips. So That's probably horrendously loud on the microphone, so I do apologize for that. So inhaling through the nose, hand on your stomach and your chest. Okay, only the stomach should inflate, so belly out, and then you're breathing out through pursed lips. So the pursed lips actually allows us to slow the exhale, because we do actually want a slower exhale for this. Okay, back to my breathing pacer, because this is a really good way of making sure that you are breathing at the correct rate. So wherever you are, if you're kind of sitting in your office or you're on your sofa or in your bedroom, what I want you to do is you're going to follow this breath pacer now. We're just going to do this for around 30 seconds and actually really see if you can control that breathing, see if you can increase that movement in your belly rather than your chest. So while you're doing that, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the kind of physiology of breathing, in a sense that when we are very much stressed, or when we're under a period of stress, we tend to do a lot more shallow breathing, which would be in the chest. And that is obviously linking to things like hyperventilation, which is not what we want in those stressful situations, or when we're feeling stressed or uptight. As we start to slow our breathing down, we start to actually increase what's known as cardiac vagal activity, which is the activity in the parasympathetic system. So that system which opposes the sympathetic system, which is obviously very much involved in fight or flight, the stress response. So what we're almost doing here is having a counter to that kind of sympathetic activation, which has already kind of been mentioned, which we would see like the activation of stress hormones such as cortisol. So by doing this, it's such a simple technique, and it allows us to kind of counteract that sympathetic activation that we have during stress. So this is a really, really simple technique to be able to increase our parasympathetic activity. And then as a result, we might then see further psychological benefits. So for example, decreases in anxiety like we saw earlier, perhaps better sleep quality. So this is definitely something that is really simple that has a lot of psychophysiological benefits. So I'm hoping that you maybe nailed the technique. You might need to practice. Definitely athletes that I've worked with, it's taken up to 4 weeks for them to actually learn the technique properly and actually still be following a pacer for the first 4 weeks potentially. So it can take quite a long time to actually learn this technique if you're not familiar with it. So linking back to us being on our phones all the time, unfortunately, that really is something that we can't necessarily get away from in this day and age. So I'm really trying to kind of tap into, let's use our phone for something productive if we can. So apps are a really great way of achieving our 6x6 breaths. So I've got some suggestions. If you're on Apple, so iOS, Breath Pacer is a very scientific app. It's based around a sunflower. But what you can do on that is really adjust the inhalation and exhalation ratios, which is something that's really important. We'll talk about that in a second. If you're on Android, Paced Breathing also has really similar functions as well. So those are my kind of top 2 apps that I would recommend. I'm not 100% sure if it would be different in the US, but if you do want to drop me an email or ask me on Twitter, I can potentially have a look for you to see if there's anything out there that's the equivalent. So if you want to download one of these and really start to train your breathing, obviously you want to have a setting of 6 breaths per minute, but we want to maybe look at a 4.5 second inhale and a 5.5 second exhale. Now, the reason for a slower exhale is it has been shown in some research that it actually improves our parasympathetic activity more. We have a greater increase if we have a longer exhale period. So these 2 apps that I've suggested, you can actually change the settings on your inhalation and exhalation, which is why I've suggested these apps. But any kind of breathing app or mindfulness app that slows breathing down is going to have similar effects. But if you want to get really scientific about it, those are my recommendations, which are based on scientific literature. When you're actually doing this, you could use a tone or a visual aid. So obviously, once you get a bit more proficient, you might not want to be looking at your screen on your phone all the time. You can actually have a tone function where you breathe in as the tone goes up and you breathe out as the tone goes down. So there's loads of different ways that you can actually do this. One thing that I do want to touch on is this is actually a really fantastic time to create and develop new habits, because we potentially have more time on our hands than we would do normally. And this is such an easy habit to be able to put into your everyday life that's really going to boost your well-being and your psychophysiological state. And one thing that habits allow us to do is it allows us to free up what's known as top-down processing. So basically, if we create a habit, so for example, you're going to do your slow-paced breathing every morning or every night before you go to bed, it actually then becomes less effortful to do that behavior. Okay, so if we make a habit of it, we actually free up resources to do other things. Okay, and then by doing breathing as well, we're then going to hopefully increase lots of other benefits too. So my advice would be practice your breathing every day for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is nothing. No time at all. Really, really easily achievable. Set a reminder on your phone if you're likely to forget. Some examples of when you could use it: in the morning on waking, before bed to help sleep, if sleep is something that you're struggling with at the moment. And then I was trying to think of the kind of more training-based things. Actually, why not do it during a cool down? So when you're maybe running a virtual session, why not take 5 minutes at the end to really, cool your participant down physically, but also psychologically as well. And then my kind of final take-home messages to hopefully uninstall some of that stress that we're kind of feeling at the moment is this is easy, it's free, it's really fast, you can see benefits in just 5 minutes, and it's a really great way of reducing stress. You can download a breathing pacer app. The majority of those are very, very cheap, or but most of them are free. And try and find 5 minutes every day to practice your slow-paced breathing. If you do have any questions, try and stop the screen share now.
Dr. Mosley, that was fantastic. Let's take just a couple minutes for any questions. So let's raise a hand, and Hannah will field that question and hand it over to Emma. We'll just take a couple questions before we move on to our roundtable.
Okay, I got it.
All right, so we have Teresa here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Emma. That was great. My question is, are you familiar with breath work in relation to this slow breathing? I can't see your face, so I'm going to turn this off. Now I can see your face. That's better. And how, breath work sessions that I've done have been longer sessions. And so I was just wondering if you can do that type, how they are related, and also how this is related to breathing and meditation.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because obviously any kind of like meditation or yoga or Tai Chi, a lot of that is heavily researched in exercise psychology. So we see a lot of kind of interventions around using those types of exercise, which use that kind of breath work within those physical exercise sessions as well. The majority of the time that actually also has the same benefits that I kind of talked about today. My kind of area of expertise is more thinking about that kind of short-term gain from just kind of slowing our breathing down, perhaps in the moment, or creating a habit. But I definitely have read a fair amount of exercise psychology research that has looked at similar fields. So like your breathwork sessions, or like yoga or Tai Chi, for example, mindfulness also. And they also have very similar effects in terms of the physical effects, but also the psychological effects as well. I hope that answers your question.
Great. We have another question from Richard.
Hi. Very much enjoyed your talk. My question is, a bit of a story. I had a yoga instructor, also a martial artist, who trained with me. And of course, I'm hearing some of the things that he told me, because when I was getting him to train, I was talking about breathing, just short, quick puffs of air, which is generally the type of breathing that we tell people to do during high intensity training. But he was convinced that he needed to do this. And he attempted to do this during high intensity training, what you're describing, which tended to work. And I said, I don't really care as long as you don't hold your breath. I didn't want to debate it. But of course, towards the end, as he was reaching failure, I think his deep breathing sometimes went out the window and he was just doing the best he can to finish his set. Any thoughts on whether the short puffs of air that we encourage during high intensity training might be more of that shallow breathing, and there might be a way of adapting this? Or is it when you're out of breath, it's harder to do, obviously, during strenuous physical activity?
Yeah, of course. And I think that's a really good question. And I'll have to first kind of start with a disclaimer of I'm definitely not a physical researcher in terms of the more kind of training side of breath work. So I wouldn't necessarily know how those short, sharp breaths influence our kind of physiology. But obviously, as soon as we are in a state of exercise or kind of physical exertion, parasympathetic activity is going to be pretty much diminished anyway, because we need that sympathetic system to be able to obviously feed the muscles, etc., etc. So with regards to that, I actually wouldn't know any specific studies that have looked at the differences between that. But actually, slowing that breathing down is usually as a direct result of perhaps feeling stressed or needing to relax. So that's when I would kind of suggest that. But that's a good question. It's something that I'll probably have to look into.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, let's pause there. And Emma, thank you so much. I am so glad James introduced us. That was absolutely brilliant and outside of the normal scope of content that we normally get to absorb. So that was just brilliant. Thank you for being with us. It was fantastic.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to transition now to our roundtable with Adam Zicherman and Bill DeSimone. So I just want to talk through what this roundtable will look like from a format standpoint. So Adam prepared his kind of opening comments, which will last for about 8 minutes. Bill prepared his opening comments, another 8 minutes or so, and then we'll just open it up to Q&A. And the way we'll do that Q&A is I have a number of seed questions. I'll ask a question. They'll respond to that question, and then we'll turn it over to whoever wants to raise their hand and ask a question. And we'll go back and forth between one of the questions I kind of have planted and our audience's and participants' questions. And Hannah will unmute you, and you can go ahead and share your question. And I want to encourage you to make your question concise so that we can get through as many questions as possible. But with that, let's turn this over to Bill DeSimone, a man that needs no introduction, author of Congruent Exercise, which really changed how so many high-intensity and strength training practitioners looked at exercise. And since then, he's been prolific in teaching us how to apply biomechanics to how we engage in strength training. So thank you so much for joining us, Bill. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Do you have my slide show up?
Yep, we can see it. It looks perfect.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about, prompted by Luke, is that since most HIIT practitioners are using Nautilus, MedX, and other machines, I'm going to talk about some exercises that lend themselves to being done at home. That, by the way, is Sabrina, one of my interns last year, who now works for Adam at Inform Fitness. Sorry about that. First one. All right, technical difficulties. Let's try that again. Sorry about that, folks. You just saw much more than I wanted to reveal. Okay, so Sabrina's here. What's going on here?
Are you able to do a screen share there,
Yeah.
Bill, or not?
In the middle of screwing that up at the moment. All right, give me a second here.
Why don't we let Bill get his slides ready, and then we'll just turn it over to Adam. And Adam, you can take your 8 minutes, and we'll move forward with Bill.
Okay, am I on?
You are live. We can see you perfectly, and we can hear you perfectly.
All right, fantastic. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, James Fisher and Dr. Mosley. That was very good. Thank you, Luke and Hannah, for inviting me and to putting this together. This is a fantastic opportunity. I'm Adam Zickerman. I am the owner of Inform Fitness. I am broadcasting here from my basement at the epicenter of the pandemic, New York. I've been in business about 20 years now. I own a little small family of personal training studios. And I wrote a book called Power of 10. Believe it or not, it's already 16 years ago that I wrote this book. It's basically a basic book on high-intensity training. I also have a podcast called the Inform Fitness Podcast. I was asked to speak about my experience pivoting from being a high-end personal training center with great tools and equipment and an incredible social culture, thanks to my staff, to virtual training. Well, it's been interesting, to say the least. Going from a thriving, active locations to just working out of your basement has been, a stress to the system, speaking of stress. Let me start with a conclusion. Was it worth it? Is it worth it? And resounding yes. And it's worth it on many levels. Let me give you a little bit of some stats to start, though. When we were first closed down in late March, about 10% of our clients jumped on the virtual training bandwagon right from the get-go. When I did a podcast recently with Lawrence Neal, I had mentioned that we had just started and we were really around 10, 15, maybe at most 20% of our business doing virtual training. That was about 4 weeks ago. And I would say we're probably at about, as a blend, 30 to 40%, give or take, of our overall business is now working out. Like I said, 10% jumped on the bandwagon right away. The other clients that jumped on later, a lot of them needed all kinds of convincing, and we had a multitude of strategies for that. There are definitely some clients that won't do it for various reasons, and there are some clients that just can't, quite honestly, do the virtual workouts, which is one of the reasons they were actually coming to Inform Fitness Studios, because of our tools and our instruction and the promise of being able to work out when they couldn't with conventional means. But it's going well, and it's keeping me busy. There was an article. I want to make 3 main points before I just leave it to the question and answer and bring it back to Bill. My first point is that I want to use a Wall Street Journal article that appeared today as an example of my first point. Title of the article in the Wall Street Journal is "Fitness Guru's Home Workout Leaves Parents in Need of Ice Packs." The subtitle is "British Exercise Phenomenon Joe Wicks Leads Children in Calisthenics During Lockdown, but when adults try to follow along, the mishaps pile up." This is an article that's actually trying to be kind of funny when you read it. thinking it's kind of cute that when the parents are trying to do these children calisthenics, that they're the ones getting hurt. And I kind of found it interesting and a little bit annoying, quite honestly, that they had kind of a cavalier, snarky attitude about it, thinking, oh, how cute is that? The parents can't even keep up with the children's workouts. The workouts were a lot of box jumps and calisthenics that you'd see in a plyometric studio or CrossFit studio. As we know, kids are just like having fun and jumping around. But when the parents are starting to do it, a lot of injuries occurred. So my first point is, even though we don't have our tools available to us anymore and our studios available to us anymore, doesn't mean that the home workouts and the conventional methods are all the same. You have this guy in Britain hurting people, and then you have people like us and probably all of you out there that are taking it much more seriously and using biomechanical correct and safety measures as you go through this. So that's point number one, which is, this is important. This is important to stay healthy. We were talking about progress before. And quite honestly, this is not necessarily about progressing and maximizing our results. This is about staying active, reducing stress, and getting the benefits, the physiological benefits of doing something once a week in a high intense fashion. I think it brings up this is a very salient time during the time of this pandemic that we have to think about our exercise programs, not so much as getting stronger all the time, but more as healthcare. And I just saw a notification pop up on my phone that just said that most people that are hospitalized for COVID have underlying health issues. Well, that doesn't wake us up to deal with our health issues. I don't know what will. I mean, we need to stay strong, stay healthy, keep our body weight down, our blood work good. So when we're faced with things like this, we survive. Dr. McGuff talks about that a lot. I think he calls it headroom, physiological headroom. And he talks about a lot of people in intensive care units based on trauma, not just COVID, but all kinds of trauma, that their survival is based on their strength. And their chances of survival is based on their higher levels of strength. Point number two I want to make is, and I don't want to sound too corny, as a support for doing virtual workouts, and that is, and what I'm learning is, well, we really miss our clients. We miss seeing them every day. We have really, really strong relationships. And I kind of almost get choked up when I think about the fact that we're all isolated and not able to spend time with each other. Because these are more than workouts, these are relationships. And these virtual workouts are keeping that connection going. And I can't tell you, I think more than anything else, that's why these virtual workouts are so important for them and for us. My third point that I want to make, and final point about virtual workouts and what I've learned in these last 4 weeks, is that although I was skeptical of doing this at first, I realized this is a really good thing that happened in one way. And that is that it's really helping myself and my colleagues really hone their training skills. It requires a lot to do this properly. A lot of pre-planning, a lot of communication, proper articulation, programming with light weights, pre-exhaustion, the use of pre-exhaustion, because let's say one of your clients only has a 2-pound pair of dumbbells. So pre-exhaustion becomes very important just to get into muscle failure. It also underscores our skill at biomechanics. And of course, Bill DeSimone's really going to dive into that. But, you know, you can do lateral raise with a dumbbell the wrong way and the right way, or the safer way and the more efficient way versus the more dangerous way. And it's just a lateral raise. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, again, the third point is about how this has really helped us become really good trainers, and it's increased the bond between our clients and us. And it shows our clients in a way how good we are at what we do. And it doesn't matter what tools we're using. We know how to use them. As I've mentioned all the time, a proverb that my dad used to say a lot of this is that a good craftsman never blames his tools. And if you're listening to this conference, you're one of those craftsmen, I'm sure, that knows how to use their tools. And we're needed out there because, as I pointed out before, there are guys out there hurting adults in these home workouts and trying to get some intensity going by doing all kinds of nutty circus tricks. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks for listening.
Adam, that was
absolutely
fantastic. So, Adam, thank you. We'll get into tons of questions with Adam in just a bit. Bill, your slides look great. You're all set.
Okay. All right, folks. Speaking of what specifically to do, let's try this again with the slides. That is Sabrina, former intern of mine, now working with Adam. I just like the picture. I know you don't have pullover machines in people's homes. So I'm suggesting classic exercises, squats, push-ups, some kind of suspended row, or I call a plank row. And then something for the back, and the bird dog, and the dead bug for the opposite side. In keeping with the previous speakers talking about managing stress, this might not be the time to try to push people to failure or push them to the top ranges of their intensity. So these exercises are something to tide people over, and plus they give you something to coach. So for instance, now in these slides I showed you what I consider to be the proper beginning and finish. But these next slides, this is where you get to coach a bit. So frequently, someone squats, they go into the sway back posture. Hips are forward, shoulders are back. This feels like it's a break, and it is a break, but it's a break because you're shifting load onto the structures, not on the muscles. On the right is, the ass to the grass position, which is also classically loading the spine in flexion, which is pretty much contraindicated if you want lower back health. Here we are with the push-ups again. Now here's, again, his nose is up against the ground, probably setting himself up at some point for an anterior instability in the front of the shoulder, which is why I suggest starting at about a right angle at the elbows. And the finish position, not quite as risky when as much stress, but shoulders are protracted forward, the posture's kind of falling apart, elbows are locked. Might be okay at the end of a set if you want to gather yourself for the extra reps at the end. But as a general rule, I would coach people not to go into that position. And what you'll find in general is that, instead of just barking at the person to get another rep out no matter what, by avoiding these positions that load the joints and take the pressure off the muscles, the actual set feels harder. And since you're not going to be in a position of just adding necessarily weight to people training at home, any little tricks you can do to make the same weight feel harder is useful. Well, again, here's a plank row that you may not have access to, but again, the posture is falling apart here. And in the bird dog, the right positions, the legs and the arms are horizontal. While kicking the leg up higher and lifting the arm up higher looks more dramatic and creates much more of an arc, you're also creating some twisting in the spine. And the point of the exercise is to hold the posture in the spine, not necessarily to create the extreme movement. And now the the dead bug exercise, or for the front of the core. On the left, with both legs out, the weight of the legs pulls the pelvis forward, which will encourage the person's lower back to arch. Now, if the person's advanced enough, they may be able to do it with both legs forward and manage the posture of their lower back. But assume to start, they can't, and that's why in the earlier slide, the one thigh was vertical while the other thigh was extended, so it's a little easier to manage the trunk. And in the second picture, where the knee is past vertical and the other leg is extended out, it's kind of encouraging a twisting in the back. So this is all a way of giving you something to coach other than just the intensity. In a way, the person will have to think about what they're doing in order to manage their posture, and that'll create its own feeling of intensity anyway. So I lost track of my time also. So go ahead, Luke.
So you have another 2 minutes if you want it, Bill. You can keep rolling.
All right. So again, with these, again, getting back to whether you're going to coach intensity or you're going to coach something else. At a certain point, even in a good studio, you might hit a point where if you continue to increase the weight, it throws the form off. So for a given person's skeleton, there's a maximum amount of weight they can handle. And so it becomes a way of finding ways of keeping that weight challenging. So especially with body weight exercises like this is where playing with the cadence comes in handy. So if you're used to doing 10-10 and you switch to like a classic Darden 2-4, you've changed something. The person has to kind of refocus, and it's a way of making the same weight feel harder, which at this point is probably good enough. Again, we're just trying to tide people over until we can get back to normal. One of the other things Luke had asked was about using time static contractions. And the way I incorporate that type of work is after someone has done, say, 10 reps in a minute very strictly, I have them lower the resistance about halfway, and then they do the static hold. So if they can now hold that static for another 30 seconds, so 90 seconds total, then I'm pretty sure we can add resistance or add effort to the first minute. And so in that way, that the static is really like a prolonged negative. So I think especially virtually, any trick you can do that makes a given weight feel harder is going to be very, very, the client is going to notice it's going to feel like a different workout. So.
Okay, so that's fantastic. Let's pause there, Bill. Raise your hands with questions, and then Hannah will unmute you and you can ask the question. I'm going to start off with a question for Adam. So Adam, can you give us real specifically a couple of the exercises that you've included that work well for clients like over the age of 60, or maybe a client that has some musculoskeletal issues or concerns? What have some of those go-to exercises been for you and for Inform? And Hannah, can you unmute Adam?
Are you cool? Unmuted. Sorry. Like I said, it varies. there are some 60-year-olds, quite honestly, that are in better shape than some 20-year-olds. So, but I know what you're saying. Yes, I start with what I call, the desert island workout, 3 exercises if you're stuck on a desert island. Bent over rows, squats, and push-ups. I just did a video of that, showing how you can exhaust yourself doing those 3 things. Now, of course, everything's up for the individual. I mean, if you have back problems or something like that, you might not be able to do bent over rows. If they don't have the motor skills to have good form for bent over rows, then they can't do it. There's a lot of assumptions that you have to make here, and a lot of analysis, like, are they able to do these movements? But it doesn't take a lot of weight to fatigue. We use a chair for the squat, so they sit down on a chair and touch their butt down on a chair. Bent over rows, again, when you bent over and you go slowly enough, doesn't take much weight. Soup cans, water gallon jugs we're using, all kinds of things like that. And, of course, push-ups from the knees, on an angle, like leaning up against a bedpost or something where they're kind of like on an angle to reduce some of the force. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Also, another important one for older individuals, which I think is important whether you're in the studio or not. In the gym, we have good equipment for it. Nonetheless, now we're still doing calf raises. Calf raises, talk about healthcare. I mean, lower leg claudication, blood pooling, swelling of the ankles due to weakness of the lower extremities. And for older people, it's very important to work those lower calf muscles. And it's so easy to do even on a step or a stair. If they're very weak, two-legged. If they're stronger, one-legged with weights. It's very important to do. So we're adding all that in. Planks, simple planks to get some of that intensity up. But that could be a bare minimum. I mean, lateral raises from the side. You'll have somebody lay on their side. And if you only a 2-pound dumbbell, 3-pound dumbbell for a weak person is what you need to do a lying on your side lateral raise to work the shoulders. And then talk about pre-exhaustion. If that's not enough, what I do is I'll have them do the lateral raise on the side, then have them sit in a chair and do overhead press. They're pre-exhausted on the delts. So maybe they can get something out of the shoulder press. Because doing a shoulder press fresh with very little weight, they'll be there all day long, right? So you got to think of all the pre-exhaustion techniques. Not so much because, as we were talking to James Fisher about, not because pre-exhaustion is some kind of magical hypertrophy magic bullet or something like that, or better than conventional. It's just that when you're using such nominal weights, sometimes pre-exhaustion is everything you can do to build up intensity. It's not about another thing. I just thought it's not really about intensity all the time, and this has come up already. I talked about connection, seeing each other, reducing stress. Just seeing each other helps reduce the stress. Now, I have one client, we do 3 exercises, and we spend the other 20 minutes having coffee together. And this is high stress, and stress does affect our recovery. Stress does affect our immune system. And I'm coming out with a podcast on that exactly in the next couple of days, how the research on stress and our immune system, exercise and our immune system. Yes, protocol, programming is important. Glute bridges is another one. If you're in a weakened state, it takes a lot to do a glute bridge. Ab crunches on an incline if possible, instead of coming straight off the floor. If it's possible to have them somehow be on some kind of incline to do their ab crunches, whether it be on a ball maybe. So those are some of my initial thoughts on protocols. If anyone has any more specific ones, I have all my charts, all my virtuals right in front of me. They vary all across the board. I can read off a couple if you think it's worth it.
Yeah, go ahead and read off a couple.
All right. Here's just random names. Bonnie. Start with a wall squat, hip abduction with bands, push-ups, squats in the chair, rows, overhead press, calf raise, abs arm ball. Here's another random one. Well, that's not a good one because he has equipment. I'm going to try to pick ones where you don't have equipment. Obviously, if you have some person that has access to a full gym, then well, that makes life easy, doesn't it? Here's another one, random. Here's one: bent over rows, squats, push-ups, lunges, lateral raises. And I never do lateral raises standing up. I always do unilateral lateral raises lying on the side, or at least a 45-degree angle. Planks, Superman, glute bridges, hip abduction, calf raises. See, I'm always putting them in there if possible. Here's something that's push up from the toes, then to the knees. So we're also doing I'm also doing multiple sets in some cases, repeating things or doing, I guess what you'd call breakdowns, right? Going from toes to knees on a set of push-ups, things like that. How's that?
That's fantastic. Let's go to a question. Hannah, if you want to unmute somebody.
So Denise Morton has a question.
Hi, Adam. It's Denise in Chicago.
Hey. Hi.
Yes, I miss my clients too. I miss a lot. But I hope I don't put it in the spot, and I hope it's not inappropriate, but we're comparable in metropolitan cities. What would you suggest in terms of charging for your virtuals? How are you charging your clients?
Yeah, oh boy, that was a lot of thought went into that when it started. Again, there's so many unknowns about this whole thing, and it's hard to make plans. It's even hard to price when there are a lot of unknowns. So let's start with that. I thought we charged the same. Some people thought that was tone deaf. We thought we put their packages on hold and have them pay individually, the same rate individually. And a lot of them are doing that because they want to help out and help the cash flow. For those that thought it was tone deaf, and when other companies are doing a lot of reduction in prices just to keep things going and to help out, I'm not insensitive to that. And whenever somebody brought it up, we were like, okay, whatever. And we ended up doing a sliding scale for our clients that needed the help. And we're even doing some pro bono work for people that have lost their job just to keep things going, people that are furloughed. So anywhere from a premium for the clients that are willing to pay a premium to help us out and to put their packages on hold and they know the worth of what we're offering, to just keeping it going and doing what we have to do just to keep in communication. And we have a lot of clients that aren't doing it that we're still talking to a lot, by the way. And we send them videos, we send them ideas to do on their own. Free of charge, of course. Just do something, take care of yourself, reduce stress, pay attention to that, and we'll see you when we get back open.
Hey, Hannah, another question from attendees.
Attendees, if you would like a question asked, you have to raise your hand. I know there's questions. Okay, we have one from Gigi.
Hi, Adam. It's Gigi in California.
Hello, Gigi.
I was just wondering, for the clients who aren't working out with you and they eventually do come back, how do you think that's going to look weight-wise as far as getting them back into their routine and the reductions that might have to be made if they're not continuing with some sort of plan on their own?
Good question. It's hard to answer. It comes to knowing that particular client, really, to be honest with you. If I was to kind of guess and have a starting point, basically, I'd probably stay 15% less if it's been a couple of months and they've done anything. If they've been keeping up with it, I'm going to try to pick up where we left off. That's a cool experiment, actually. But if they completely dropped off and became sedentary and gained a lot of weight, I'll probably take 15, 20% off and take it from there.
Okay, we have a question from Richard Wolf. Richard, you there?
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Hi, Richard.
Go ahead.
Just wondering, Adam, what kind of timing you're using between exercises, given you're trying to build that fatigue with some of these different tools you're using?
Richard, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a point that I wanted to make that I forgot to bring up. Yeah, for those that can handle it, we try to go rapid. So when I mentioned earlier that a part of what's making us better trainers is workout planning, pre-planning these workouts. I'm spending a lot more time planning these workouts than I do in my gym. Giving time considerations and all the other challenges that come up. Excuse me. Hope it's not COVID. Yeah, so I do try to zip people through, actually, to keep that intensity up if possible. Yes, definitely. And that's why it's pre-planned. That's why I have them set up their stuff ahead of time. I'll even send them an email telling them how to set up their equipment just so they can go boom, 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 the pre-exhaustion stuff. I love going from, for example, I love starting with bent over rows, which works the legs and works the back and works, of course, the upper back, and then going right into a squat, never letting go of the dumbbells, into a chair squat, and then going right into a set of push-ups. I mean, everything after that can be gravy if you kind of zip right through that routine right like that.
Okay, another question from, never mind. We had one. Oh, there we go. Teresa's back up. Okay.
Thanks, Hannah. Sorry, I got excited and unmuted myself. Hi, Adam. Thank you very much for talking today. My question was two things. Number one, did you have your clients sign an additional waiver working out at home? And number two, are you doing all these movements with your clients?
Am I performing them with them, you mean?
Yes.
I'm demonstrating in some cases, but no, I'm not. And the first question, what was the first question? I'm sorry. Oh, she was cut off, right? What was the first question? Somebody? I forgot the first question.
Anna, can you have Teresa jump on again?
Teresa, can you raise your hand one more time?
I'm sorry.
It was about the waiver. Are you signing?
Oh, right, the waiver. No. I mean, I didn't even think about that. I hope I don't have to sign one. If anyone knows that the answer to that, please let me know. One more thing to worry about.
Okay, fantastic. So what we should do here is let's just pause. And for those of you who can stick with us, and Bill and Adam, I hope you can stick with us because I know we're going to have a lot more questions that we can transition into in just a little bit during the happy hour period. But I'd love to just wrap up with a few points myself. I have a stopwatch here, I promise. I'm going to try to put a limit on how long I go for this. And, we said the official content would go until 5 o'clock. And if you need to drop off, go ahead and drop off. But I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint here. And I'm assuming, Hannah, you can give me a thumbs up if we can see this okay. Okay. Well, we study Winston Churchill because of Nazi Germany. We study Lincoln because of the Civil War. We study Alan Mulally because of the Great Recession of the 2007, 2008, and how he turns around Ford during that time. Ultimately, how we lead during a storm is going to define us as a leader. And so I think we need to frame this up as this is an opportunity, and in fact, it's a privilege. It's a privilege to lead in a storm. We don't probably have a chance to really be great unless we're faced with the storm. My favorite quote that no one remembers from the epic Rocky IV is Apollo and Rocky having a conversation early on in the movie when they become aware of Ivan Drago. And Apollo Creed wants to fight him. And Rocky's like, well, why? You have all this money. You have everything. What do you need to continue to fight for? And Apollo says something to the effect of, he says, because we're warriors. And he goes on to say, he says, without a war, without some battle to fight in, the warrior might as well be dead, stallion. And so I think if you're going to lead in any context, man, if you don't have a battle, if you don't have a storm to lead through, you might as well not exist. And so I think we have to have this kind of opening thought, this mindset that, well, this is a great opportunity. It's really a privilege to get to lead during this time. So I have 4 things I think we need to focus on in our leadership as we work through all of this. The first one is cultivating the right mindset. So I think we should be reminded of the Stockdale paradox. The Stockdale paradox comes from James Stockdale, naval officer who's trapped in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam. And he's brutalized and he's tortured and he's there for years. And he finally gets out of the camp and he's asked by Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great and Built to Last. He says, well, Mr. Stockdale, tell me, what were the common factors of the people that perished, that died? And tell me the common factors of the people that survived and that made it out. He said, well, that's easy. The optimists, they died. And Jim Collins said, the optimists died? And Stockdale says, yeah, the optimist says, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas rolled around and we weren't out yet. And they'd say, we're going to be out by next Christmas. And Christmas the next year rolled around and they were still in the camp. And they ended up dying, in the words of Stockdale, of a broken heart. Their spirit was broken. So the Stockdale paradox is 2 things. It's never wavering in your faith that we absolutely will prevail. We will 100% get through this. That's step 1. But step number 2 is face the brutal facts. We have no idea when we're getting out. We are not getting out by Christmas. So it's facing brutal facts balanced with prevailing conviction that we will get out, we will survive this. So embrace the Stockdale paradox. I think the second mindset, and I just have 4 points on mindset, is have gratitude that we have something worth fighting for. My goodness, the purpose, this just cause that we're all a part of still matters. And you can make an argument that it matters more than anything. We're in a global health epidemic. This is a health situation that we're in. The work that we do is more relevant than it's ever been. Now, the third one is work only in your circle of influence and ignore the circle of concern. I mean, I would say spend literally no time in your day complaining about what's happening in Washington. That is, if you're in the US. Spend absolutely no time concerned with what your governor is doing. Spend no time worrying about the pathophysiology of the disease, and spend all of your time worrying about what should you be doing next? What can you actually control? And then lastly, around mindset, I would say this is a time to not overthink anything. We need to think, and then we need to take action. It's not a time to overthink. So George Patton has the perfect quote here. A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. So one of the things that stood out to me with Adam is he launched right away. He said, I didn't have a choice. He launched. It was the minimal viable product, and then go ahead and make iterative changes and improve it. But we have to launch. So I think those are some of the elements of the right mindset. The second thing I think we need to do is we need to understand first who, then what. Who will you need in your business to be able to survive and prevail as we transition out of this COVID season? So there's really 2 parties here. Number 1, you need your staff, and number 2, you need some customers. So with your staff, and there's people on this call that have 1 personal trainer working with them and 50 personal trainers working with them. You have to understand who are the staff that we cannot lose. We're going to get through this, and when we do get through it, we're going to need great people to move the organization forward. So who are those great people? We need some tactical things to make sure these people understand that they're valued, and we need to have plans in place to be able to retain these people. So what I did a month ago is I wrote down 20 things, 20 tactics that we were going to do in our efforts to retain our people. And we have a number of Discover Strength people on the call. They don't know that I did this, but these are the things that we're doing. So we said we're going to bring an individualized dinner to all of our new employees' home. So whoever is a new employee, tell me where you like takeout. I'm going to go pick up dinner for you. All of our, what we call iconic trainers, our most experienced trainers, just pick a spot that you want dinner from, and I'm going to bring you dinner. All I can think about is food right now because I've gone from restaurant to restaurant, picking up food and dropping it off, wishing I were eating it. Clear goals. Every trainer needs a number that they're focused on achieving. Transparency. I mean, every single day we have a 30-minute meeting with all of our staff and say, Here's the headlines. Here's what's going on. We just got approved of the PPP funds. This is what we're dealing with. So transparency. Understanding the best compensation for each position within the company on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. It might be, hey, you should go on unemployment because unemployment is really good. It should be, hey, you're not going on unemployment. We're going to pay you because we have this PPP fund coming in. So every week looking at what's the best way to compensate employees. We chose a movie every week. We're on, I think, our 6th week right now. And the whole staff watches that movie, and then we discuss that movie in an effort to shape our thinking and our attitude. David, our director, or our VP of operations, has just offered to personally train every one of our staff members over the next 30 days. I've done the same thing. We've had no layoffs. We've made every employee whole with regard to compensation. So no matter what, everyone has received the exact compensation they would have if we weren't in the middle of this. We're offering new trainer bonuses, not new trainer bonuses that are new if they hit certain weekly session volumes. We did a guided meditation from a meditation guru in Australia today. She joined us at 4 a.m. and met with our staff at 1 o'clock today. So that's just a couple of the things. That's more than a couple. That's about 10 of the things that we're focused on in taking care of our people. Now, the second thing you need to do is be able to take care of your clients. And so the tendency here in a situation like this is to start focusing on yourself. I'm telling you, we've seen every brand, virtually every brand I can think of has gone internal. They are only thinking about themselves. You have an opportunity to differentiate yourself by going external and focusing on others. So when I say focus on others, I say don't focus on the commodity, focus on the relationship. You don't know what you're going to be selling 1 month from now or 6 months from now, frankly. Focus on strengthening the relationship, and then you can turn and you can sell virtually anything at that time. And frankly, Adam said that. He just said that in a different way. Focus on the relationship. Then if the relationship is intact, we'll be able to sell whatever commodity. All right. We must communicate with our clients right now. Brands everywhere are going silent. You have a chance to stand out. So a couple of the tactical things we did here. We called 1,000 of our clients and just said thank you. I mean, that was it. We just called and said thank you. All of our leaders did that. Short videos to your entire client base with updates. These have to be really short. Identify the top 20% of your highest revenue clients and reach out to them in a unique way. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to 300 of our top spending clients. I'm recording a video where I call them by name. It's bespoke to them and just texting them that video. Identify your top referring clients and do something special for them. So for us, we took our top 25 referring clients. They're getting some exercise bands, a handwritten thank you card, Australian licorice, because I just don't know how you can survive a quarantine without Australian licorice, and a 5-minute journal, which is just a great gratitude practice. And they're getting that mailed to them right now. So the place I get my hair cut at, they told me about 1.5 years ago that I was the highest revenue customer they had, because I come in and get a haircut every 7 days, and I get an eyebrow wax every 14 days. That's some transparency there. And I never miss. And they say, hey, we make more money off you than anyone. Well, they got shut down 5 weeks ago, and I haven't heard a word from them, not a call, not an email, nothing. And so we have and this is what every brand is doing. Brands are going silent. If you speak up, if you reach out, if you connect with your customers now, you have a phenomenal opportunity to position yourself positively. So that's number 2. Number 3 is cash and financial decisions. I just want to go through 4 of them. Number 1, apply for the PPP, apply for SBA loans. Consider unemployment if that's the right approach for your staff, layoffs and furloughs. But you got to balance the furlough and layoff approach with, have you applied for the PPP? Because you're only going to be able to have that be a loan that does not need to be paid back if you don't do a layoff and you don't do a furlough. So that's number 1. Number 2, everyone on this call should be renegotiating leases with landlords. The key to renegotiating your lease is you have to have an ask in mind. Don't say, we need to discuss this. Say, here's what I want to do. I want to do deferred rent, or I want to do abated rent for 3 months. Then when we get back to business for the next 3 months, I want to do percentage rent. I'm going to pay you 7% of our revenue and no more than that for the 3 months following that. And then you have to be able to describe why that's a win-win. Okay, landlords across the entire country are saying yes to those things. So we should be renegotiating our leases. We can consider things like an advanced auto pay, advanced purchase of packages of sessions, or gift cards. So we can even offer discounts on these things, slight discounts on these things, to buy 20 sessions ahead of time, to buy a $100 gift card ahead of time, to buy your next 3 months of auto pay ahead of time to improve our cash position. And then number 4, and of course we've already talked about it, is virtual sessions or a new revenue stream. It's my position the companies that come out of this well are the companies that are going to focus on revenue generation. We will not be able to conserve or save our way out of this. We can't cut expenses enough to survive this. We need to sell our way out of this in conjunction with cutting expenses. So to me, that means drive new revenue. It might be virtual sessions. It might be something else. And the last thing I want to talk about is how we market. So everything that you market should be framed around dealing with COVID, number 1, and number 2, recovery from this recession. How are you helping me with that problem? So you have to state the problem and talk about how you're the solution. So here's the problem. Gyms are closed. The solution is we do home virtual workouts. The problem is I have more stress than ever because I have to spend time with my spouse and kids in my home. Our solution is a workout. That problem is a weed. You are in a garden with weeds everywhere. You have to point to the weed that is the problem, and then you state your solution to that problem. All of your communications have to be short and pithy. 3 bullets, 3 options, not long emails or not paragraphs. Here's the 3-point plan of how we move forward. Here's our 3 options that you can purchase from us. We should be communicating constantly more than ever, but it should be more succinct than ever. Stop talking about your struggle as the personal trainer or as the business owner, your struggle and your fight to stay open. I mean, that's naturally what we want to talk about. We can talk about that today. That's what this is for. But don't talk about that to your customer. They want to hear about how you're helping them overcome their problem. So state their problem first. I know that you're stressed out because of boom, boom, boom. Here's how we're going to overcome it. I know here's the biggest problem that's out there in fitness. Every virtual option that's out there is what? It's me watching a personal trainer, a fitness person, do an exercise class, and I do it at home. So I'm watching them. They're not watching me. So the problem can be, I know that every virtual training option out there involves you watching a fit person do stuff. What you really need is someone to watch you and coach you. That's why we launched the whatever your company is virtual training option. So point to the weed, point to the problem, and talk about how you're going to overcome the problem. It's an important reminder in this environment, people do not buy from people they like. They buy from people who are solving problems and providing value. So we should continue to strengthen that relationship, but we should understand what's the problem, what's the weed they're facing, and come up with a solution to that particular problem. Okay? So the last marketing piece is call your clients. All right? I mean, get on the phone and call every single client. That, frankly, in this time period is marketing. So I want to comment on the future. All right? What are we looking at in our industry? In my opinion, over the next 2 to 3 months, virtually all businesses will survive. There's enough aid. If you haven't got it yet, it's coming. We're going to survive the next 2 to 3 months. And we didn't know that 1 month ago, by the way. Right now, I think most of us are going to survive. The great businesses will be defined by what does the first quarter back look like, and what's the first 12 months back after we open look like. You should be building your revenue base right now so that when you're allowed to open, you're hitting the ground running. We're going to survive now. What's the first quarter look like? What's the next 12 months look like? Now let's transition to health clubs. Health clubs have a very uncertain future. It's predicted that 30% of clubs that are closed right now will never reopen. The largest change in the country, $1.6 billion, 24-Hour Fitness is considering bankruptcy right now. It'll be interesting to see what they do. The future of large health clubs is uncertain. Studios and training facilities are perfectly positioned to grow coming out of this. I mean, we have this unbelievable, none of us would have rooted for COVID. This is a horrific situation. But in terms of the opportunity for studios, one-on-one and small group personal training, we are perfectly positioned to come out of this really strong. We should remind ourselves that the work we do is more important now than ever. I want to share 2 more things with you, and I promise I'll stop talking. One is a poem, and then just a closing statement. So I love this poem. This was written by John Greenleaf Whittier in the early 1800s. It's called Don't Quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is strange with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns. And many a failure comes about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell just how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when your hardest hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit. I want to wrap up and just kind of remind everybody on this call, and maybe I'm reminding myself, that the story of your life, you are the hero of that story. I mean, you are writing the story of your existence right now. And for a story to be compelling, for a story to be worth reading, for a story to be worth watching the movie about, the character, the hero has to be compelling. So we have this great opportunity, okay? For that character to be interesting, they have to be brought to their knees. So many of us are being brought to our knees right now. You, as the author of the story about your life, write the right story, okay? Craft the right story. So I will end with not a message about the future, but a picture of Dr. James Fisher with a double bicep pose in front of the great leader during turbulent times, Winston Churchill. So with that, thank you for attending. If you can stay on, I'd love you to stay on, and we'll just open it up to questions. Here's how we want to do the questions. We want to do more than just questions. I have a stopwatch here. I just want to give you 30 seconds. Give us an update on how you are doing. So who you are, how you're doing, and then you can throw out a question, and you can say, I want Bill, I want Adam to answer this question, or anybody on the call can chime in and answer that question. So that's kind of how we'll move forward. So raise your hand, Hannah will unmute you, and then we'll time you 30 seconds, talk about how you're doing, where you're at, and then throw out a question to any and everybody.
Does everyone have a beverage? It's supposed to be a happy hour, so.
We have the same thing, Hannah.
Oh, we got Owen. Here we go.
Hey, everyone. Owen and Lucy here from California, Live Oak Strength. This was an awesome time. Great to reconnect. We're doing fine. We're getting used to adapting to virtual workouts. I've got 10 virtual workouts scheduled tomorrow. Super stoked about that. And I can't stress how much we agree with. This is not about the workout. It's about keeping that relationship strong with the clients. So happy to help. Owen at liveoakstrength.com. Reach out anytime. Love you all.
Thank you, Owen.
All right, Denise.
Hey, Luke, that was very inspiring kind of wrap up there. We are most concerned, we're doing fine. We're closed. We do go to our studio to do our own workouts. That's a blessing. But we're moving forward. My question, I really would love for you just to take a few minutes and expand a little bit more about working with that landlord.
Yeah, great question. So landlords are facing an environment that they have never faced before. So this is new territory for landlords. So some of their scripted responses to you early on, they're changing as the weeks pass. What they're saying no to 4 weeks ago is different than what they're going to say now, because we're literally looking at a situation where, all of their tenants are not going to be able to pay. I mean, they're just not going to pay. And so I think they are more willing to renegotiate right now. But the key to the renegotiation is you can't say, we need to talk, we need to renegotiate. It has to be, this is what I propose, this is what's going to work for our business. So then you state, we've been a tenant for 12 years, and we are currently in a 7-year lease, we want to be a long-term phenomenal tenant for you. But in order for us to get there and really make this a win-win and to protect your revenue, here's what we need to do. I need rent abatement. So rent abatement means I'm not paying any rent for 3 months, or I'm not paying any rent when there's a state mandated shutdown, and you can tack those 3 months on the end of my lease and I'll just operate longer. Or I wouldn't even lead with that. I would say we want rent forgiveness. We're not paying rent at all for the months that we're closed. All right. And then when we start paying again, that's what I would recommend. 2 months like that. Hopefully it's not more than 2 months, maybe 3 months like that. And then the first quarter back, say, we'll start paying rent, but it's got to be a percentage of our current revenue. And you can work that percentage out. That percentage is probably going to be between 6 and 10%. And when you throw that 6 to 10% out to your landlord, that's going to resonate with them. That's going to make sense because they know occupancy costs relative to all the different industries that they work with. So that's how I would move forward with it. Landlords are prepared right now to not have tenants pay. And so this is not official advice. I don't think you should be paying your lease on time in these next few months. And you should let your landlord, let them know that you do not plan on doing that. And here's what you propose instead. I would be very hesitant to say, give us rent abatement for 3 months. And we'll make that up the latter part of this year or in the next 12 months. Because my goodness, when are you going to have a massive surge in revenue where you're able to do that? So I would go with abatement, tack it on later, or just we're not paying rent and we want forgiveness for a couple months. And you're going to be surprised by landlords that say yes to that. And then I would look at you can Google this. This is going on all across the country. It's going on in Asia. It's going on everywhere right now. And you can even provide those data points. Let them know. So the landlords used to complete information asymmetry. They think they know everything, okay? And you know nothing. You know something now. I mean, you know this is going on everywhere, and you got to share that with them. Hey, I'm aware what the current climate is, and here's what our plan forward is, or our way forward is.
Right now, we don't have anyone with a raised hand. Oh, Richard Wolf. Here we go. Richard, it says you're muted.
Am I working?
There you go.
Okay. Just a big thank you to Discover Strength and your whole team, Luke, for all of your hard work to present this webinar today. Phenomenal information, lots of practical how-tos, inspirational information. We are closed. We're not seeing clients, but we're doing okay. And we've thought about calling everyone. So I think that's probably going to happen now. We've stayed in touch with people, but there's definitely some action steps we could take to, as you say, strengthen that relationship so that we're helping to solve problems. But just a big thank you, and look forward to staying connected with you guys.
Richard, thank you so much. It's so fun to make these phone calls and just say thank you, because they're almost waiting for you to sell something or ask something, or, I'm calling them and freaking them out. And I just say, hey, I just want to say thank you for being a client, and I appreciate it so much. You've been a client for 6 years, and man, I want you to hear it from me. Thank you so much. And they're just like silent for a couple seconds, and they say, well, no, thank you. And then they usually go on and talk about how much they miss our staff, and that's the phone call. So I think it's, let me tell you, I'm looking at my phone right now. I have no missed phone calls from the place I get my hair cut, and I'm just waiting for them to call and just say, hey, we love you. Thank you. We'll be back at this soon. We'll cut your hair in a way that people can't tell that most of it's gray. I'm waiting for that phone call.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right, Peter Rana.
Peter, what time is it in New Zealand?
Yeah, what time is it, man?
It's 10:22.
10:22 a.m. in the morning. Hey, by the way, Luke, Hannah, meet Monique. Monique, meet Luke and Hannah.
I feel like I know them. I feel like, hi guys, feel like I know you guys. Thank you.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, hey, this is amazingly how long we've been listening since it's almost 3 hours, isn't it? And it's gone so fast. You guys are amazing. I just love what you're doing, and we are just, before we sign off, we just wanted to give you a great big thank you and a hug. And we really are disappointed that we weren't able to actually see you, in face to face. And right now, New Zealand's not going to let anyone out of this country. We're hoping that we could make November, but we never know. But that all said, that our government has taken care of us quite nicely to be able to keep all our employees paid. And we're expecting to go into level 3 beginning of Tuesday next week, and then we're going to be then going into level 2, which we'll be allowed to operate and pick up from there. So we feel we're pretty blessed.
Yeah, and also thank you so much for your spreading the love and the positivity and your leadership. It's infectious, and that's the thing that we need to be focusing on. Really, really appreciate it. Like minds, awesome tribe. So thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. It's so fun to be doing this with people that operate studios like all of us operate and work in. And I'm really involved in the health club world too. And I have a board meeting next week, a board of directors for IHRSA, the International Health Club Association, next week. And that's such a different conversation because health clubs are just up against it. I read an article 2 days ago from Mark. I'm going to say his last name wrong, so just jump on and tell me I'm saying it wrong. Ripito, who is not like a classic high-intensity training guy at all. I mean, I've never read a strength training article from him, but he was trying to predict the future of the health club world. And he said there's 2 things that are going to persist. This is how people are going to strength train going forward. Number 1, they're going to strength train in small studios with one-on-one strength training. And number 2, they're going to buy strength training equipment in some extent, some capacity for their home, and they're going to train at home. And I thought, my goodness, that sounds like Adam Zickerman's business plan. I mean, that's literally like what so many people on this call are doing. So we're doing it because, I don't want to put words in everyone's mouth. We're doing it because we have to do it, right? But he's saying this is where the industry is going to go based on this. The new normal is not going to be the same normal that we're used to in 2019. And I think that's just really encouraging news for everybody that's on this call.
Let's hear from Kyrie. Kyrie? Okay, whenever it says you're able to talk, so. All right, we'll go to Joanne.
Hi, Hannah. Hi, Luke. It's Joanne Wolf here. My computer just must keep saying Joanne Lolino. I'm with Med Fitness. From a manager's point of view, a couple things I'd like to open up for a chat is number 1, how do you guys, or do you know of any products out there to keep your equipment clean and protected? I do have a connection to Decon 7. I know the provider for that disinfectant has spoken to President Trump about it. So I'm wondering if you have any products out there or how you intend to keep your equipment safe. And my second question is, what measures are you thinking of taking to protect your trainers in feeling safe from a health aspect to work with your clients again?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about the systematic client walking in that doesn't even know they might be, contagious, or what are your thoughts on that?
So great question. Why don't you just go ahead and raise your hand, anybody that wants to tackle that? I mean, I know everyone's going to have some opinions and plans on what they plan on doing with that. So whoever wants to answer that question.
We got a few raised hands, so. All right. Diana, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Thanks so much for putting this on. We just had our quarterly leadership meeting yesterday, and we talked about this. One of the first things we're doing is supplying masks to the trainers. And obviously this may change if new protocols come down, but this is kind of what we're thinking, is that all clients have to have their own mask when they come into the gym. We have a system that we're developing where they're going to put their keys into a Ziploc bag that will go to the back door. We can go all the way through, and we'll take that to the back door and leave it there. They'll bring their own water bottle. Everybody will also have gloves. We'll have a cleaning station for the clients. They'll go through their workout. We're only going to start with 2 trainers in the gym at a time, so we can stay on opposite ends. Our sessions are going to go from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So it's going to allow an extra 15 minutes for the trainers to clean the equipment in between sessions, and also allow for a little bit more communication with our clients, because I know they miss us and we miss them. And then when the client is done, they'll go out the back door and come around to the parking lot. That way there isn't a clog at the front door. And then the door will be locked. The front client services rep will unlock the door, let that person in, clean the doors, clean anything that's been touched, and we start the process again. So that's kind of where we're starting. I'm very interested to hear what other people are doing as far as their protocols, and then what cleaning products that they're going to be using. So thanks for having this, you guys. It was great to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diana. Thank you for sharing all that. Other people that want to weigh in and just talk about the cleaning products that they're using and the protocols that they're using. And let's spend a couple more minutes on this for sure, because it's critical, but let's not spend the next 30 minutes there. So a few more minutes on it.
Hey, Richard, how come I can't hear it anymore?
We can hear you.
Oh. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Kyrie, do you have any, I'm going to try to unmute you. Good. Kyrie, do you have any weigh in on this? I know that you had your hand up.
Yeah, we're just starting to think about how to deal with the sanitizing. Personally, I'm not a fan of the high chemical sanitizing. I think it's a very toxic environment to work out in and for my trainers to work in. So I'm considering an alcohol-based sanitizer for hands, which also has some plant essences for added antibacterial, antimicrobial support. I have a very light alcohol spritzer, more like a mister, that I'm going to pilot on the equipment as soon as it arrives. And just looking into face shields and possibly sanitizing them, reusing them. Right now, we're probably maybe 2 to 3 weeks at the earliest that we're going to reopen here in this province. So we're just starting to consider those matters.
Fantastic. That's great input. Anybody else want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think we have a couple people here. Here's Bryce.
Hey, folks. Who am I? Where am I? My name's Bryce Lee. I own Strength Space in Chesapeake, Virginia. And where am I? I am currently in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a mobilized reservist, part of the, even though I'm in the Navy, I'm part of the Army's sort of response to managing the COVID crisis. And the hypochlorous acid is the cleaning solution that I gravitated towards and ordered a bunch of before I got mobilized. So hypochlorous acid breaks down over time into essentially saline. So I would encourage everybody to kind of do their own homework on this and evaluate it and see if it passes your smell test research. But it's a sanitizing element that has been used in wound care and used in areas where not hurting human tissues is important, but also destroying germs is important. And for about 100 years, it was not able to be synthesized in a way that would remain shelf stable. And so now there are a number of companies who found a way to synthesize it where it'll stay shelf stable for 24 months. So the one that I grabbed, I think the company that I purchased from is called Pure and Clean, and being an ampersand sign. So if you Google Pure and Clean hypochlorous acid, and I can type that in the comments. So it's pretty affordable and, again, pretty gentle on human skin. You spray it on equipment and it just evaporates off. And it kills with somewhat similar comparable efficacy to bleach, but then when it evaporates, it essentially leaves no residue that might be harmful to human skin. That's the value proposition, and I again encourage everybody to sort of evaluate that for themselves and see if the research seems to support those claims.
Hannah, you're muted.
Mike, do you have any weighing on this, Mike? Wolf?
Oh no, my question really it's something to add. As they've talked about this phase 1 and gyms being part of that, okay, we're part of that, great. When I take a client through, when I work out, there is a ton of heavy breathing. And so what little I've learned about this, that it's on your clothes, it stays on your clothes, nurses coming home should disrobe before they go in the home, or et cetera. I really don't see us being able to open. This environment is, it's not like I'm sitting at my hairdresser and I can wear a mask or they can wear a mask and I'm comfortable. I can't wear a mask in this environment and work out. I wear a mask going shopping, I'm overheating. So anyhow, that's my thought. What does anyone else want to add?
Yeah, great thought. Let's open that up.
No to mask.
And we have fans everywhere to blow it all around.
Mike, I would take that up with your landlord, first of all.
Yeah, I know. He's no help.
Any comments on Mike's comment there?
Permitted some people to talk if anybody wants to weigh in. People that have already chimed in.
This is Diana again from Oregon, owner of Muscles in Motion. And yeah, I don't like wearing a mask at all. I don't care for it. But it's just the reality. And I think a lot of people, we have lots of clients that are just begging to come back in. And, that I think people are going to be willing to do what it takes until there's a solution to this. And, we don't know until we try a lot of times. And I feel like that's the situation we're in, that we need to try and then we can adjust. We can adapt. We can figure out a better solution for people once we at least try something. So, like I said, that's just kind of what we have outlined. That's kind of our guideline. We're going to make sure that we provide gloves for everybody as well. Don't know how well that will work, but at least we'll try it. And then we can change from there.
Fantastic, Diana. Thank you for that. Joanne, go ahead.
He stepped out, guys. I guess the other question that she was going to ask was the distancing issue of But I guess a couple of people have touched on that in terms of how many trainers to clients in the studio at one time.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, if that's okay, Hannah, on the way I think we should all be thinking about this in terms of phases. And I think every business has to think this way, but there's 3 phases that we're going to deal with. Phase 1, and these are not the president's phases, these are just my made up phases, but phase 1 is when we start to reopen businesses, right? When you are able to go back to a restaurant, when we're able to go back to the studio. So what are the concerns there? The concerns are, how do we keep employees safe? How do we keep customers safe? How do we socially distance? What are we using to clean? What are we doing in terms of masks, gloves? Are we taking temperatures when people come in different facilities? That's phase 1. That starts like now in some parts of the world, and it's going to last over just the next couple of months. So I would call that back to business is phase 1. Phase 2 is the end of back to business all the way until there is a vaccine. So that's like 2 months from now up until 18 months from now. So what will life look like in phase 2? Well, I'm pretty sure people won't go to sporting events like NFL football games. I would be surprised if they're live. I don't think I'll run the New York City Marathon in November with 50,000 people. I just don't think they're going to allow it. And so phase 2, like we're going to be like businesses are going to continue to grow and proliferate. It's just going to be different. And then there's phase 3, which is post-vaccine. So after we have a vaccine, we're not going to go back to business like 2019. Things are going to be different. We've expedited things like digitalization and trends that were already taking place. So those are the 3 phases we have to plan for. So, I mean, everybody in this call should think about, what does my phase 1 look like? How are we going to keep the studios clean? How are we going to social distance? How many feet between exercises, or between exercisers do we need to have? Phase 2, I think we're really well positioned for phase 2 because we're not health clubs. We're not Orange Theory Fitness. And then phase 3, what's life look like? How's the consumer think post-vaccine? It's just like 9/11. We think about 9/11. When 9/11 happened, 2 months later, where was the safest place you could possibly be? It was on an airplane, right? I mean, that was the safest place to be, but no one wanted to fly. Everyone started driving. And Lawrence had it on his podcast. Dave Smith talked about the number of fatalities, traffic fatalities skyrocketed, because if you live in Minnesota where I live, instead of flying to Chicago, you just drove the 6 hours to Chicago. And so trying to do the safer thing, we actually contributed to more deaths. And so those are kind of like phase 2 considerations. Well, what's a phase 3 consideration around 9/11? It's that I used to, before 9/11, before September 11th, I could go to the gate and greet a loved one when they got off the plane. And post 9/11, we don't do that anymore. And we still don't do that. We're not going back to doing that. It's just a new normal. The new normal is very different than pre 9/11 was. So we have to have some foresight and understanding what phase 3 looks like for all of us.
You're listening?
Yeah, I was writing notes.
Lawrence has been so patient, and I'm going to let him talk because he's a baby, and it's the middle of the night there. So, Lawrence.
Thanks for joining us, Lawrence.
Maybe he ran into more baby stuff. I don't know.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I just had to literally install an update to allow me to speak, which I just did very quickly. Yeah, the baby seems fine now. He stopped crying, so I can talk for a moment. Yeah, awesome presentation, awesome webinar. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys, for setting this up. My name is Lawrence. I'm the host of High Intensity Business podcast, and I just very quickly wanted to say, kind of add to what Luke was saying there about everyone sort of pivoting to solve problems for their customers. And that's kind of what I've been doing, obviously, for you guys. And in case you haven't seen the podcast, I just wanted to mention a couple of episodes that would be very useful to everyone right now. So I did one with episode 260 with Ratna Singh. She's the founder of Carol. And she's actually, or Carol, are paying $500 USD per Carol bike you sell to your end user. Which could be very lucrative. I recorded one which literally went live the other day with Gary Griffiths on how to generate revenue now and when things reopen, and it's a tactically rich podcast. And there's more coming. I won't go through all of them because I'll be taking up too much time. But recorded a podcast with Luke today on how to generate revenue of virtual training. Again, very tactically rich, and that'll be coming soon. And then there's just some nice distractions. I did one with James Fisher today. Do different loading ranges matter for strength, hypertrophy, and muscular endurance? So I hope that will offer a nice diversion from all the media as well. So look out for those, and excited to see you all at Rec in the fall in 2020 as well.
Thank you so much, Lawrence.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've been diving deep into the podcast world because it is not the media, and that's been helpful. So thanks, Lawrence.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Other updates on how people are doing?
Celeste, how are you doing?
Hannah?
Yeah, hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I've hope everybody's doing fine, and just we appreciate everything y'all are doing. I've just been kind of sitting back, and reason being, let's see, how can I say this? Probably after the first week, I just started thinking, hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We were shut down. And so we got together with a couple of my instructors, and we shot a couple of videos in my backyard around my pool, and we were 20 feet apart. And we shot them out to our clients, thinking that maybe 10% would probably do the workout. And we were correct about that. We called and we got texts, and they were like, hey, this is great. We're going to try to do it, but we still need y'all there to push us. So being a little nervous about doing it, I've had several clients call me and say, hey, Celeste, look, can you please train me? So we have done so in my backyard. I have a tremendously big backyard with a swimming pool. It's like you're at a spa. So I have been training clients at 20 feet apart, and they are absolutely loving it. They're saying that they feel that this body weight training, which I'm doing dynamic time static contractions and static holds, is harder than anything they've done on the machines. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do going forward? So I feel I don't want people to think that I've been irresponsible by training live, but again, taking every precaution. The clients don't come into my house. They come up the driveway, they go into my big backyard, and it's just been pretty great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay.
And you must have good weather there too.
Okay, here's the thing. We have fantastic weather. It's been like heaven. But the thing is, I start about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I don't go past 12 o'clock. And it starts getting a little warm. But I'll tell you, it is kicking their behinds. And so yeah, but I'll tell you what, we haven't done virtual training yet. I'm still trying to learn how to do it and all that. Really haven't had to because of the weather. But once we get back into the studio, I'm going to make sure that every workout, somebody is going to learn how to do a body weight exercise, be it a time static, just anything, dynamic, so that we won't be caught like this again. Or they can use it when they go on vacation or whatever. So that's just kind of what we've been doing. And why I've held back a little bit, I haven't been talking because I feel a little guilty that I have been training one-on-one, but with social distancing.
Oh, good. Thanks for that update. That's fantastic. Okay. Fantastic.
Dwayne, do you want to give us a little update on how Dwayne Wimmer is doing?
Okay.
And Dwayne, can you comment on the legislation also and what's being worked out on from an IHRSA standpoint in the article that just came out today?
I could. First of all, how am I doing? We're closed. I'm slightly on a different pathway, only because the virtual training is not something I want to continue with, and I feel like if I did that with some of my clients, they would want to do that rather than come back into the studio. I think having a little hiatus from what they normally do, they'll value it at a higher level. Yeah, I'm not making any money not doing it, but I think in the long term, I'm going to keep them longer. That being said, I'm still in contact with them. I'm just not training them virtually. From the article that came out today, some of the leaders in IHRSA were quoted, and from my standpoint, the article paints the fitness industry more like a high level company lobby or organization lobbying the government to open up the ability to health clubs to open sooner than maybe most people would think they should. So I'm not exactly sure that will be a positive spin on the fitness industry, just because it'll look like we're pushing the government to open a health club and again, this is across the board for the health club industry, that we're pushing the government to allow health clubs to open before bars and restaurants and so on. So
this is largely, let me just add, Dwayne, this is largely coming from Brahma Krati, who's the founder and CEO of Lifetime Fitness, which is, $1.8 billion health club company. They laid off 90% of their people. And he is now on the committee, constantly in communication with Trump, saying, "Hey, we need to open up health clubs again." And so you're right; we could all get lumped in with that. And I just wanted to clarify that, Dwayne. I didn't mean to steal your thunder. You can continue.
No, I agree. It's the big organizations, along with some smaller, big facilities that are lobbying the government to allow the fitness facilities to open in the first phase, which I'm not opposed to in the sense that because I do one-on-one training, so I don't have a problem. I don't know that, first of all, most of us on this call should have been closed in the first place, because we don't, if you go to a grocery store, you're more susceptible to being infected than in any one of our facilities. But to have the big lobby to the government to open all fitness facilities, I think we as fitness facilities, being lumped in with fitness facilities, are going to not necessarily benefit from that, because when you get people going to Lifetime Fitness or these other big facilities getting sick from the virus, they're going to shut down the fitness facilities again like they have in China, and that we're going to be lumped in with that again.
Yeah, that's something to worry about for sure. It's positive in one sense that we could have the green light to open, but it could lead to something worse, Dwayne. Something to monitor for sure.
I think the parameters should be more about people per square foot versus industry.
That's brilliant.
I mean, I don't know that, if Lifetime could open at 2 people per 500 square feet, they would open, but they couldn't, because they couldn't sustain their model that way. They couldn't make any money. But
it'd also be tough to police it, right? Like, who's going to actually police the social distancing?
Exactly. So, I mean, for the people on this call, I mean, most of us probably are in a position where what we do on a regular basis probably should have never been shut down. But you can't differentiate. If we're all in the health club industry, you can't differentiate us at sometimes and then not others.
That's tough. That's tough. Hey, before we jump off, and I'd love to get a few more questions, I wanted to throw this up for people to see. This is a new article that just came out in the New Scientist, and it's called Discover Your Inner Strength. And this is like, you got to pay to have this article. So I bought it, and I have the PDF. If you want a copy of this article, just email me at luke@discoverstrength.com. But I'm just going to give you 2 highlights or 3 highlights from it. There's an it came out 2 days ago. There's an underrated aspect of your fitness that boosts health and brain power and extends your lifespan. No steps needed. And then the sidebar quote is, when it comes to fitness, muscle power has long played second fiddle to aerobic exercise. And the table of contents for this issue of New Scientist says there has never been a better time to start strength training during this COVID season. So it's just it's a really cool article where it's scientific, but it's not a peer-reviewed journal article. It is so short and so well done. So if you want a copy of this is the kind of piece that I think is worth sharing to clients. And frankly, I know this stuff, right? I still get excited about this. When I see this gets me jacked up and makes me think, thank goodness that we fell in love with strength training, however many years ago, and that's what our businesses do. We're just so well positioned to come out of this by focusing on something like strength training. So we have 7 minutes left. Let's get a couple more check-ins or a couple more questions. Just how you're doing.
All right, we got Tom here. Tom?
Oh, yeah, hi. I was wondering if I could get a... Luke, you had read a poem or something toward the end of your talk earlier about not. Can you tell me where that came from?
Yeah, do I know where it came from? Let me see if I have it. You can email me and I'll just send you a copy of that also.
I put Luke's email in the chat as well, so everybody has access to that.
Yeah, Luke at Discover.
Okay, do we have one more question or comment or share, and then we can wrap up? And
Mike Petrella, how are you doing?
Mike did 1 rep on every machine he has throughout the entire last 3 hours, and he still hasn't got to every machine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
How's everybody doing over there?
Good.
It's been interesting times up here. I've been following your news closely. We have a lot of differences between how, I guess, our country's been getting on and then how your country's been getting on. And then I talk with the Collins brothers in the UK quite a bit, and they're on the police force, so I get their information. And it's very interesting to kind of see how everyone's doing things quite a bit different. We've been finding that, I guess you could say, the highlight of this, the silver lining, if you will, is that buying power has gone up considerably. So we bought equipment today. We're buying 2 more pieces tomorrow. We bought something 2 weeks ago. We got another piece coming next week, but we put the down payment on that in August, so I don't really count that. But I've been finding that it's interesting that home equipment is going through the roof. There's people around here buying those old plastic sand plates for 10 times what they were worth a month ago. But commercial equipment is dropping like a stone. And with 30 Gold's gyms going out of business now, and that's just the start, there's going to be a giant influx of commercial equipment that we probably haven't seen in the last 10 years. So we're actually, hopefully starting this weekend, because we have lots of spare time on our hand, building up a new space because we have the time, but $100 goes a whole lot farther now than it did 2 months ago. And if you got a bit of a war chest you're sitting on, and I think it might even get a little bit worse. I don't think we're even at the top of the hill yet where we start moving in the right direction. So I would say start going on some of these sites and seeing what's out there, because we've been kind of buying up a storm quietly in the background. And that is the one, I guess, silver lining that I'm seeing out of all of this. If someone did have expansion plans, now might be the best time possible, because I think a lot of people, and not just in the fitness industry, have overextended themselves greatly. And the government's doing their best to bail everyone out as much as they can, but even that's not going to last forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Mike, I could have predicted that your solution to this would be buy more equipment. And,
it seems a little too on the nose, doesn't it?
I love it.
Hey, we have one more person, Patrick Driver, and then we'll wrap up.
Hey, Pat, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick Giver here in Orlando. And like everyone else, I'm doing the virtual stuff. I'm also, and I know, Luke, we're connected on Facebook, but I've been pumping out these videos just to stay in front of this. A lot of it is just to stay in front of clients. But it's also helped me pick up some new clients. So I think the constant communication is very helpful.
Could not agree more. Patrick. Good to hear from you. Let's wrap it up there. And on behalf of Hannah and myself, thank you so much for joining us. This is a stressful period for everyone. There's uncertainty, and it was just really healthy to come together and just connect. So thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you all live in November and celebrating that we have moved through this phase at least and continued to prevail. So everybody have a great night.
Discover how to achieve your health and fitness goals, become a great personal trainer, and build a successful, high-intensity training business. Check out highintensitybusiness.com. highintensitybusiness.com.